begin our meeting moment. Thank you. Jay Farrell, would you lead the pledge?
Would everyone rise for the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Before we start on our official agenda, I wanted to share with you all a lovely picture of the courthouse, which was taken by our own planning board member, John, and was entered in the Chatham County Fair and won a blue ribbon. So he has asked me if I would like for this to hang in the mayor's office, and I'm delighted. It is. There were two pictures. One was summer and one was winter, and I have chosen this one, hoping that someday we might actually see a little snow on the courthouse. Anyway, I love it. You have your agendas before you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as proposed, or a motion to modify the agenda?
To modify the agenda by pulling item number 4 for some additional time to read and understand the plan.
Item 4 on the consent agenda?
Yes.
You may remember that was a regular ceremonial item on our last agenda at the end of September, and is that in accordance with the wishes of the board? Yes. Then can I have a motion to approve the agenda as it is, except for the removal of item number 4 for further study?
I'd like to make one other mention of another item on here. And just if we could have this information for the public hearing, and in the future have this information on the plans. We're talking about the perimeter buffer. What I think would be exceptionally helpful and appropriate is for those property owners adjacent to the buffer to be identified on the plan. So if we could have the property owner and their land use documented on the plan, I think that would be really helpful information for the public to understand and for us to understand this public hearing that we'll have on these type of buffers.
And this is consent agenda item number 5, which is set for public hearing October 22nd. So what Michael Fiocco is suggesting is that the adjoining property owners be identified for the purposes of that public hearing.
And if we could get that posted to the web as soon as possible, that way folks will have the ability to understand before the public hearing which properties are theirs for respective properties.
Did we have a motion here on the approval of both the regular agenda and the consent agenda with the modifications? So moved.
Second.
Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. The next matter on the agenda then is citizens' matters. There are 3 citizens signed up to speak. Due to our regular rules and the fact that we have a fairly lengthy agenda tonight, we will be glad to hear anyone who either signed up or failed to sign up and wishes to speak with respect to these items. The first person signed up is Heather Johnson. If you'll come to the podium. We usually allot 3 minutes per speaker, but certainly we want to get the evidence of what it is that you're concerned about.
Hello, Heather Johnson. I'm at 225 Springdale Drive in Pittsburgh. And So I have sent several messages to different members of the board, including the mayor. We're just hoping that as parents of Horton students and surrounding area students, that we can get a little support or just facilitating some support for some dangerous things that are happening in the afternoons on Friday afternoon. What we're seeing is that there are groups of kids that are coming through without any other, I guess, supervision or things to do. I don't know. But what that has resulted in is every Friday it seems that it's getting worse. It's not a new problem. It's a long time problem. So it's not a particular group of kids. Nobody's being targeted in any way. It's just a long-term problem that, once Chatham Park happens, if parents think that there's a safer place for their kids to go, that might be what they do. I'm concerned that the school's going to take action and my own kids aren't going to be able to walk downtown freely as they have for 6.5 years. So it's so serious that there are business owners that have been vandalized. Kids are there was a kid beaten up on Friday. Passerbys are getting sworn at, and I don't know what we can do to help these kids, but I feel like it's a long time coming of a situation where we have a few groups already, communities and schools, the YMCA. We have some groups that maybe if you could help us facilitate some type of partnership or help, even if it's just temporary, if we focused on a Friday afternoon activity or a place for kids to go or something for them to do on Friday afternoon. I don't know what the answer is. I just know that Friday should not happen again. It was alarming. My daughter just walked outside of my office to the van and was verbally assaulted and came back in crying. And then I heard about everything else that was happening. So I didn't even see any kids. I just heard about it from everybody else. And so then after that, I couldn't send my daughter out. And then I heard from other business owners that, Joan at Blue Dot said that she's going to have to stop serving young people on Friday afternoons. I think that's a problem, because to have a blanket rule of to stop serving young people, there's no alternative but to stop doing that if they're an unaccompanied minor. That's what she said, if she would stop serving unaccompanied minors. I don't know what the solution is. And I think on Facebook, when I was trying to ask other parents, I used the word troubled youth, and I think some people got very upset about me using that word. And I didn't mean to offend anybody, because I just don't know what better word to use. I was told that some of these kids are repeat offenders, but this has been going on for quite some time. So I didn't mean to offend anybody. I just honestly want to find a better solution as a business owner, as a parent, and as a community person. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Samuel Lasseter.
Good evening. I am here for the same reason. My name is Reverend Samuel Lasseter. I do not pastor in Pittsburgh, but I pastor in Hornet County. But my heart is in Pittsburgh, and I live in Pittsburgh. For as long as I can remember, that was the thing to do on Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, times change, people change, and things change. I think that our young people are outgrowing, their mind is outgrowing the small town of Pittsburgh. There are some things that I feel that we need to look into. For one, Pittsburgh is one of the only counties that doesn't have a middle school football team. With that football team comes coaching, mentoring, and something for kids to do. Also, I don't know if you're aware of, but Sanford has a Boys and Girls Club. Even South City has a Boys and Girls Club. Pittsburgh does not have a Boys and Girls Club. Now, you could say they could go to the YMCA, but I and my wife work. We can't afford the YMCA, especially when you're sending more than one kid. But the Boys and Girls Club, you can get help, you can get scholarships. You may be able to do that with the YMCA, but I think that it would help deviate some of the traffic in downtown. You have to remember that some of these kids, if they are local kids and their parents attended Horton and Northwood, we feel comfortable in letting our kids go downtown because Pittsburgh has always been a safe town. So if they want to do something, yeah, sure, you can go downtown because everybody knows everybody. It has the small town atmosphere. So I think that we need to look into giving the kids something to do besides go from school to school. I finished with saying nothing to do equals out hanging downtown. We don't have anything to offer them, and we need to have something to offer them. We're growing. There are businesses growing. Pittsburgh has really changed a lot. I've been here all my life. But we need to look at something for the youth to do, and then they won't be doing what they're doing now. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ron Hatley.
Members of the board, Madam Mayor, I think Madam Mayor, I tooted my horn probably along with several others as you were with your dog, and I gave you a wave a little earlier. It's good to see you today. Can you wait one moment? I'm taking the wrong pages. Don't count this against my 3 minutes. I do have an extra copy now of your agenda. I apologize. And I know your 3-minute rule. Good evening. My name is Ron Hatley. I live at 24 Roy Hatley Road. The presentation last 2 weeks ago that Ellen gave was somewhat disconcerting. It was rather frightening in terms of the water quality and the water resources that we have in our area. The original stormwater plan that we were given some time ago contained 2 pages. That's now 121 pages. Changes that are made to this are not red lines, so it's very difficult to see changes to changes to changes. The Chatham Park development is adjacent to the Jordan Lake, Robeson Creek, and the Haw River, of course, feed into the lake. The development will likely contribute significant sedimentation, nutrients, excessive chlorophyll A, high turbidity and pH levels, and stormwater runoff, all of which will exacerbate impairments. Specifically, the Haw River Assembly recommends the following in the effort to replicate and maintain what we currently have in our county prior to development. Preserve forest areas and dense mature trees, increase stormwater magnitude for peak runoff flow rates, require runoff volume matching at a minimum, 2-year, 24-hour storm, to maintain the hydrograph more similar to what we currently have in place, and the development site that should be broken into smaller areas so that there can be better analysis of the runoff and the volumes that occur. Our town manager, Mr. Messick, sent a letter to DEQ in response to the Southern Environmental Law Center concerns. We do not believe his arguments show that the current plans of Chatham Park, including the stormwater element and other measures, will adequately protect our waters, our environment, and our trees. The town of Pittsburgh should live up to their commitments to protect the Haw River, the commitments made in 2010, and insist that Chatham Park take greater measures to protect the water quality in this massive development instead of contesting it. The Pittsburgh Land Use Plan originally contained a 2,000-foot buffer. This was along the Haw River. That dream seems to have dissipated. It's disappeared. I am afraid that it's turned into dollars. What I'd like for the board to do, I give to Alice a URL that she can show that you could, if you would, look at the current land area that's being developed. I would also like to share with the board a picture of a stagnant waterway in Bynum. I'll give this to John, and John, if you would pass that around. It's a waterway in Bynum that's overgrown. The state engineer in charge of dam safety advises that Bynum Dam is exempt from North Carolina state safety regulations. If the dam fails, Pittsburgh will lose its water supply. There is no government agency to have the dam's owner, PK Ventures, they're currently in Florida, to fix the mill race. And no one is inspecting the dam because it is less than 25 feet in height. And by the way, this area is within the Pittsburgh's planning and zoning limit area. I asked the board this evening, are we really ready to approve the current plans in place, and are the safeguards in place? I thank you for the time this evening.
Thank you very much. If you want to give that to Alice.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ron. For those of you who have spoken on the issue of the situation with children downtown, right before I came to the meeting, I had a call from Kim Karaganis, who you may know is the director of the school communities in the school program, and she has volunteered. She's aware of the situation, and she has volunteered to be a member of a task force or some other group. I think, Heather, you suggested a partnership, and that kind of entity that could be composed of parents and educators, business people, and professionals who work in the schools like Kim. I think that would be a really excellent idea. So if you're interested in serving on that committee, partnership, task force, whatever, if you please get in touch with me, that would be excellent. I think we can go forward much better in that kind of setting.
I just want to add something to that, which I serve on the Human Relations Committee for Chatham County, and opportunities for the youth, recreational activities is one of the items that we consider, so it would be good to keep them in on the loop as well.
And in addition to that, we have a community policing officer, and Chief Robertson, if you could speak to that, perhaps they can serve on that particular committee also and be able to go downtown and interact with the children down there and see actually what's going on.
That's a long tradition. I'm dating back way before me. I'm sure we used to hang out downtown.
Hanging out.
Kids want to be sociable, and I think most of the kids are fine. It's just if you have a few kids that act up, and it impacts everybody. But the kids just want to hang out with their friends. And if they have a mall, they're probably going to the mall. Downtown is our mall, and they just need to make sure that the ones that they're not seen as they're all causing problems is probably just a handful of kids, and hopefully it can be addressed in a really respectful, positive way for the kids.
There's also some folks on Facebook who've expressed a great interest in doing something with the property owner of the more recent Pittsburgh Ford, the one that closed recently on Thompson here, East Street intersection. And there is a proper Facebook group for that. I think it's called Pittsburgh Youth Center or something like that. So I will let them know that this conversation happens.
And Chief, do you think that would be possible for our community officer to participate with that?
Are you referring to participating in the new coalition that you're talking about starting, or just interacting with the group?
Task force.
Task force.
Yes, I mean, any task force that is formed, please, keep the police department informed with that, and we can see about seeing if the community officer would be a part of that. She's a member of multiple task force within the county, so I'm sure that'd be something we'd be interested in.
Thank you very much.
I also will mention one thing, Heather, that I also ran into some children Friday afternoon with some very strange language coming out of 10, 11-year and 12-year-old kids. Mr. Lasseter, also, I've been trying for middle school football for 25 years. My son went through football for years, and then when he got in middle school, he had to quit till high school. So we have been trying to get that here in Chatham County for 25 years or longer. Hopefully one day we'll get it. If I'm not mistaken, there's only 2 counties in the state of North Carolina that do not have middle school football. I may be wrong about that, but it's pretty close to that.
So what's been the problem? Like funding or what's
That's what the school board has referred to, but we have made several recommendations is combining some middle schools. And instead, not having a team at one school, but like the South City area, Pittsburgh area, maybe North Chatham area, just 3 teams. And it is expensive. Don't get me wrong, it's an expensive sport. But we haven't left it out. We're still trying.
All right, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda are updates from commissioners, the manager, and the mayor. And I don't have anything to update this time around, but are there others that have attended Triangle J meetings or Human Relations Committee meetings or anything else in the interim the last 2 weeks?
Just one small thing. I met with John Poteet and Maria Lewis regarding the handrails on Main Street. Hopefully we're going to be getting something installed by the street lighting, at least one side. And then the artwork, I think, is to come later.
And I did attend the Triangle J Summit, which was fantastic. I wish each and every one of you took time. It was great, and it's a lot for me to go into right now. So since we have such a long agenda, perhaps I can do that next time, and then maybe a little show a little film in reference to it.
The Human Relations Committee and the Arts Council are both meeting at the same time tomorrow, which I'll decide which one to go to. Maybe I'll split my time. But I think the public is welcome to attend the Human Relations Committee. And I got to tour the water treatment plant this week, which was just a treat.
Mm-hmm.
Very clean.
I'll be attending the EDC meeting tomorrow morning. And I think I mentioned last time regarding Main Street that we had received the dual recycling trash containers. Okay. And I've been assured by Mr. Gruswick they're really large. So I don't know if they're going to be as large as I think. I thought they were pretty large to begin with. So we'll see. And we're going to go to the locations we think they want to be installed once we lay eyes on how large they are, and make some other decisions about that.
Brian Grusbeck has updates in handed to us here at our desk in front.
Add one more thing.
Oh,
I'm just trying to find it right now. The Main Street program is seeking volunteers, and they're having a program Tuesday, October 23rd at 6 o'clock. It's on the Town of Pittsburgh Facebook page. If anyone is interested, they are looking for people to get involved in shaping our downtown. Tuesday, October 23rd at 6 p.m.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a few things really quick. You'll recall at the last meeting we had approved a contract with a consultant to work on the Pittsburgh Elementary School bridge and culvert for the purposes of repairing the damage that occurred during Hurricane Florence, and that consultant was on site last week. We're looking forward to their analysis before we come back to you with some recommendations on repair and or replacement on that. Related is the work that we're doing right now to kind of compile the extent of the resources that we committed during the hurricane for the purpose of seeking some funding from available funding from FEMA on that, providing those expenses are all eligible, and that's what we're working toward. Hearn Road plans have been completed. We're looking at DOT, but we had staff approval, staff review and approval. We're looking at DEQ approval before we go ahead and get that out and get started on that project. Earlier today, you'll recall that you might have seen Salisbury Street was closed down for a good part of the day because of some PSNC contractors doing some gas main repair. This is, I'm told, a continuation of the work that was started last summer, probably midsummer at some point. They're replacing a valve. We're expecting work to be completed sometime by the end of this week, and a satisfactory paving job out there as well. So continue to keep our eyes on that. And then also to recall that at the previous meeting we set Parks and Rec Master Plan Workshop, scheduled that for this Wednesday, October 10th. I believe that's at 6:30 p.m. So let us know if you get anything in advance of that. Updates, next steps, I think I covered most of everything here. The only thing as far as upcoming meetings that I would point out is that we still haven't received anything from Eagles. I'm continuing to kind of plug that in on the first November meeting, provided that we have planning board discussion on that, and I'm not told that that's even an inevitable proceeding quite yet. Also, too, we're looking at is at an upcoming meeting, probably October 22nd, providing we get the language squared away, is some language regarding an ordinance amendment to the system development fees that we discussed at the public hearing in those last meeting. And then also coming up would be the audit presentation on November 13th. Audit was complete, went relatively smooth, and I think that's kind of a case of a couple of things happening. That I think things are in order, and we've had an auditor that is familiar with kind of the lay of the land and what we're doing. So that went as smooth as we can expect, at least to my knowledge at this point. We'd be looking at a presentation on November 15th for that. And with that, bless you. With that, I'll tap out. Open it up for any questions, comments, or if you want to save those till later, that's fine as well. Thank you.
And it had come to my attention, we've had a couple of planning board members, one of them, Ron Taylor, had suffered an injury the other day and still managed to come to a planning board meeting. I thought a nice note from the board would be in order if we want to pass that through. Also another planning board member, Steve Cochran, Steve and Betsy, have been very vital parts of the town community, and Betsy's mother had passed away, and I thought that we would just send some cards of concern. All right. Next matter then is the new business, the subcommittee report from the Affordable Housing Group, and Jim Nelson to lead us through that report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Commissioners, it's good to be back with you and bring you up to date on the Affordable Housing Task Force. What I intend to do tonight is bring you up to date on where we're at and present you with a set of preliminary recommendations. And what I'm going to be asking of you, either this evening or in the next few days, is to give me your comments, your questions, so that we can pull those into our discussions within the next couple of weeks and then prepare a final report and recommendations to you. So, let's see, I've got to use this thing, don't I? Okay. So what I want to do tonight is go over the workings of the task force and our preliminary recommendations, and as I say, be asking for your comments and questions at any time during the presentation or when it's complete. We began with this task force when you all approved it on February 13th of 2018, and we had our first meeting on March 15th. We've been meeting every 2 weeks with, I think, maybe one exception, to address the task of developing a policy and a strategy for affordable housing in Pittsburgh. We've had planning board representation, 2 town commissioners, 2 representatives from Chatham Park, Habitat for Humanity. We've included a Chatham County policy analyst, and for a brief period at the beginning, we had Carolyn Higgins, which gave us a major insight into the workings of HUD and how banks interact with affordable housing, so that we were pleased to have her. Okay. We've had open meetings, and we've really had a very free exchange of ideas and comments, and I think I can't say too much about how well this group came together and how dedicated everyone has been in doing their homework, reading and doing the research and coming to the meetings and participating fully. We've also had presentations from experts, Triangle J, for example, builders and developers, government officials, as well as written research that we've delved into from affordable housing programs across the nation. It didn't take us too long to figure out that there was not a perfect affordable housing program in the United States. And we also concluded that we could probably meet every 2 weeks for the next 5 years and not produce a perfect affordable housing program. So instead, we decided to try to develop a workable, reasonable affordable housing program that would put units on the ground now rather than later, so that people that need that housing won't have to wait for it as long as they would if we took eons to complete our work. So, our charter was to develop an affordable housing strategy and policy for Pittsburgh, and our task force has a major belief that Pittsburgh should be a town where people of all income levels can live, and Pittsburgh should be a town where people can both work and live here if they choose. And so that has guided our considerations as we move forward with this effort. So I'm going to give you some preliminary recommendations now. And the first of those recommendations is in the process area. And we are going to recommend to you, or recommending preliminarily, that you establish an affordable housing board. We believe it should be a 7-member board, and that you all should establish criteria for the membership of that board. But we strongly recommend that the mayor, someone from the planning staff, someone from the Board of Commissioners, and a county representative be on that affordable housing board. Now, the affordable housing board would be responsible for doing several things, but one of them is to establish yet another group besides themselves, and that is to establish the charter for a 501c3 nonprofit organization to receive funds, land, other forms of donations, and to manage the affordable housing program. They would participate in affordable housing education of the general public, of other government entities, and other boards, and we would recommend that they conduct pre-submittal meetings with developers and builders, and that pre-submittal meeting would be required as a part of the process. At that pre-submittal meeting, we would review the Pittsburgh affordable housing strategies and policies. We would review the incentive package that I'm going to talk to you about in a little bit, and we would encourage and persuade these builders and developers to engage in building affordable housing. They would also provide regular updates to the commissioners They would be the oversight group for the 501c3 nonprofit. They would actively support the 501c3 fundraising, which is going to be very important. Meet regularly and then as needed for the pre-submittal meetings, and assist any company or developer or builder that wanted to or was interested in building affordable housing in Pittsboro, and adopt the philosophy of we want to be a place where we figure it out rather than no. The 501c3 itself would have a memorandum of understanding with the town. They would be responsible for raising funds or equivalents for affordable housing. They would assist with management of affordable housing strategy and policy. They would provide quarterly reports to the Board of Commissioners and to the Affordable Housing Board. They would manage tax credit programs both 4 and 9%. And let me stop and try to explain how these programs work, because they are a major way to get affordable housing built. The 9% affordable housing tax both of these programs, by the way, are administered, run by the IRS, not by HUD. And then they are pushed out to the states, where the states manage these programs. The 9% program offers a 9% credit for taxes, and they constrain that by only allowing one 9% tax credit program per county per year. So you could get one year, and you might wait 5 or 6 years for another one. It's a competitive process. And the other feature of the 9% is it requires that local amenities be within range of this affordable housing before they approve the 9% program. It can't be that they're in plan, they're going to be built. It has to be on the ground, up and running. The 4% program, on the other hand, is non-competitive. You can have as many of those as you can get approved. And there is no locality requirements. We would build our own locality requirements if we wanted them into the Affordable Housing Board itself. Now, obviously, the 4% tax program produces less money than the 9% tax program, because what builders do is take those credits and sell them. And that's how they raise the money to actually build the affordable housing. And the 4% program is considerably less. And what that does is it creates a gap that has to be filled by soft money. And it also can be filled by reducing the cost of building those units by the incentive package that I'm going to discuss with you in just a few moments. These 501c3 would also manage the performance agreements that we would have with the builders of affordable housing. And they would research and apply for funds, grants, any place that they could get funding. And they would hold fundraisers on a regular basis in order to raise money. We would recommend that board, like many 501c3s, have a variety of members with expertise such as an attorney, banker, policy analyst, housing specialist, etc. So they would provide the funds and assist other builders in building single-family homes such as Habitat for Humanity homes. They would contract and assist with affordable housing developers to build both the 4% and 9% tax credit programs in Pittsboro. Hold fundraisers to solicit charitable dollars and promote affordable housing in Pittsboro itself. In order to get builders and developers to buy into affordable housing in Pittsboro or anywhere else in North Carolina, with a couple of exceptions, we need to provide them with an incentive to do so. So the task force looked very carefully at putting together an incentive package that we thought would be attractive enough to builders and developers to actually produce affordable housing units. And the categories that we looked at were the process of the applications themselves, densities, fees, regulatory relief, and that these incentives would be scalable depending upon the type and amount of affordable housing actually provided. I'll get to that in a minute. They would have to meet the reportability requirements. They would have to enter into a performance agreement with the town, and they would have to provide an annual report documenting that they were living up to the requirements of the performance agreement. And we believe the 501c3 organization would be the one responsible for seeing to that they are compliant with the performance agreement. The first of these incentives has to do with process. And we would recommend adopting an accelerated and simplified approval process for providing qualifying units if affordable housing units were proposed as part of the development, that the project application would go to the top of the pile. And we had considered the idea of what we're calling here on this slide a hit squad, which is if we get a lot of business in this area, which we think we will, that we may consider having a contract with some experts that can help walk these people through without completely burdening our own planning staff with this kind of a process, just doing all of that legwork and walking them through the whole procedure and getting a pretty much finished product to the planning staff. We are having still some discussions about whether the 10% qualifying units would qualify for accelerated or whether that ought to be a specific number. And for example, 5 or more units as opposed to a percentage. The next one is density, which we think is very important and also can accomplish some of the things that we want to do with small houses and that sort of thing. And what we're saying is all projects with a minimum of 5 affordable units would get a density bonus 1-for-1. That is, if you built 5 affordable housing units, you would increase your density in your project by 5. If you did 10, you'd increase by 10. If you did 15, you'd increase by 15. And so it's a 1-to-1 density bonus on a unit basis. And we think that this density bonus will be an important and key feature of the incentive package. We also have looked at fees. And that sliding scalable that I talked about at the very beginning of this comes in here. And we're saying that if you are up to 65% of annual median income, I think you'll probably remember from my last presentation that HUD posts average median incomes for areas all around the United States. And we looked at the area median income one and decided that has to be used or we're not going to get anywhere with affordable housing. But we can adjust our targets to the up to number. So for example, the up to 65 is very low income. The up to 80% to 100% is low income. And then the 100 to 120 is workforce housing. So what this scale does is say that if you're going to build very low income housing, you can get up to 100% credit on your fees, rebate on your fees. If you're building at the next level, you can get 80%, and if you're building at the next level, then you can get 50%. So we're sliding it based upon the kind of affordable housing units that you're looking at. And the areas that we looked at were water and sewer, town permits, recreation, open space, school impacts subject to county approval, stormwater, and inspection fees. We also are recommending that the towns consider entering into an interlocal agreement with the county so that the county affordable housing program and their incentive package can be coupled with the town's incentive package and make this even more attractive to builders of affordable housing. I received an invitation to meet with the Affordable Housing Task Force for the county and went to their meeting last week and gave them an update on what we were doing. And I think we had general agreement that it's important that the county and the town of Pittsburgh work together on this affordable housing project, and it's important that this affordable housing board that conducts these pre-submission reviews with developers and builders have a county representative that can explain the county program and add the county incentives to the program as well. It was a very good session I had with the county, and so I think that it's doable that we could have a cooperative mutual effort that would include not only fee reduction but tax abatement. The task force for the county is looking at a tax abatement program, and we're going to, in just a moment, I'll be sharing our recommendation on that with you as well. And then we're recommending that we look at some regulatory flexibility. Parking is one, for example, that has been highlighted by the White House in their study on affordable housing a couple of years ago as being a major deterrent to affordable housing, and being able to adjust those parking requirements downward somewhat can have a major effect. Setbacks, buffers, tree protection, transportation, accessory dwelling units, small houses, all of these regulatory flexibility issues can provide for more affordable housing than not. And then on taxes, what we're recommending that each affordable dwelling unit will receive a rebate of 100% of the increase in Pittsboro ad valorem taxes for 10 years. That's the difference between the land with nothing built on it and the land with something built on it. The difference in that would be a rebate for the 10-year period. If we can couple this with the county program, where they're considering a similar tax rebate, that would be a significant thing both for the town and the county to get together on. Okay. Now, in terms of funding, our payment in lieu provision is cash in exchange for incentives must equal the cost of ready-to-build land, not just land that hasn't been anything done with, but ready-to-build land. And what we're saying is any developer or builder that uses the incentive package has to have a plan approved for 30-year long-term affordability. We recognize that there is going to be some naturally occurring affordable housing, particularly at the workforce level, as projects are built out. But those naturally occurring units, there's no way to make those affordable over an extended period of time. So they might start out as affordable for a workforce housing, and in 2 years not be affordable or meet those requirements anymore. So we would want this to, anybody that uses the incentive package is going to have to give us a 30-year affordability program. Developer or other person again can donate land, cash, or equivalent to the 501c3 and receive the density bonus for their project. So, for example, someone comes in and says, look, I can't do the affordable unit for you, but I can give you X amount of land, I can give you X amount of dollars, and we can price those out in terms of units. Say, okay, that's the equivalent of 30 units. You can have a 30-unit density bonus. They may also go for fee reductions, regulatory relief, or require a performance agreement. Anybody that uses the incentive package is going to have to enter into a performance agreement with the town. And failure to meet the terms of the performance agreement at any time during the life of the thing would result in their having to repay any benefit that they received from the program. Now, looking at funding sources, we've got town, county, state and federal, private, and grants. And what we're recommending, I believe we'll recommend, is that 2% of the town budget, which we estimated at approximately $4 million to begin with, and then 5% of everything beyond $4 million moving forward. And that the ABC distributions, excluding those to law enforcement, be set aside for affordable housing use only. And let's see. We're also recommending that the commissioners take the necessary steps to be able to establish a hotel, motel, and meal 1% tax. And that 1% tax would be devoted solely to funding affordable housing. So our plan now is to receive your comments and recommendations and concerns, and then return with final recommendations. And those that you have on your minds right now or have thought about, I would love to hear. If some of you would like to take some time to think about that, and you have some comments that you'd like to send to me in writing via email, that would be great as well. What we'd like to do then as a task force is take all of those comments and suggestions you might have or questions you might have and fold that into another meeting or so, and then come back to you with the final product. So that's where we're at right now.
Mr. Nuss, thank you so much for this presentation, and I apologize if I missed it. Do you have a hard copy of your presentation?
Yes, it was in the package, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for all the work that went into this.
Well, this group was very energetic, and it's amazing how over time we came to coalesce around the idea of wanting to get some affordable housing built on the ground. And we truly believe as a task force that this or something very close to it could actually serve as a kind of a model for North Carolina towns to look at when they're dealing, and counties to look at when they're dealing with affordable housing. The legislature has passed legislation that makes it illegal to go down the inclusionary zoning route, and without a special law being passed, as Durham got passed not too long ago. And that means that approach like this, we believe at least, will actually generate a number of units quite significant. And I know there's some of us on task force who absolutely see no reason why we can't have a 4%, 150 unit project up in 14 months if we want to. So I think we could put that together and make it happen.
Yes, indeed, very impressive. Thank you, Jim. I'm particularly enthralled with the idea, of course, this would take legislation to do the 1%
Yes.
hotel tax, hotel meal tax. But as our man in the House of Representatives has achieved some really amazing leadership abilities, I think that's probably quite doable.
Yes, I think that this kind of a program, when it's set up that this money is going to be used for a specific purpose such as this, has a very good chance of coming to be. And then that also spreads the revenue base a little bit.
I think this all looks wonderful. There was only one that I had any kind of reservations about, and I don't know if other communities do that, and that was the waiving of some of the regulatory requirements, such as setbacks and buffers and things like that. Because my concern would be that we don't want it to stand out. We want it to have the same quality as surrounding properties with open space and trees and simple parking and that kind of thing. I have concerns about that.
Absolutely agree with that being, have to be handled very, very carefully. But it may turn out, for example, if we were doing some things that we wanted to do, a small house kind of an approach, where we might be able to work with that for example, on setbacks in a way that wouldn't be a part of the normal plan. And the other feature of this, and one of the things that the Affordable Housing Board needs to be very cognizant of, in my opinion, and I think most of the task force agrees, if not all, design is a kind of a critical element to get to your point. We want units that are very, very attractive and very functional. And I think there was the last 4% program, 4% tax program that was awarded in Raleigh, was awarded on the basis that of design. I mean, all the numbers were there as well, but design is what actually won that builder. That award was the design. And looking at their designs, they're quite attractive indeed.
And thinking about some of those regulatory adjustments, you can think of those setbacks and buffers, maybe not in the perimeter, but maybe just in space, so the houses can be close together, and that kind of thing. So
It's not doing away with like not all the trees.
No.
I don't.
That wasn't our intention in the task force at all.
So I think, but looking at it very carefully as to what does that mean, but recognizing that if you've got a piece of property and you want to increase density to accommodate, probably there has to be some kind of adjustment somewhere.
So how would that be determined?
I think we like an ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there'd be a process for deciding to make sure that certain things are okay. Have a plan in place before you just blanketly.
Yes.
Right. And I think that would be part of the board's ability to educate the developer on what the incentive package does for them. Because Jim mentioned the inclusionary zoning issue. One of the things we found is that a lot of towns and cities are using the stick. And so they've got reluctant participants. Right? The stick meaning you're going to have to do this or else. And we heard from a lot of different groups who said, we're not opposed to it, but we need some help with this. So that's where the scalable incentive package idea came from, is how can we incentivize people to participate in it by having a community that says we believe it's important to have these and we're willing to help.
Okay. So any comments, again, that you pick up in the next week or so, please get them to me by whatever means you find appropriate, and I'll make sure the task force considers those as we move on to our next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And I'd also like to thank our own participants, Pamela Baldwin and Mike Fiocco, for their dedication on this.
I do want to mention that the policy analyst from the county that's been at all our board meetings, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz, has been outstanding help to us. And I'm very hopeful that we can get the county to let her be on the Affordable Housing Board should you all decide to put that together.
You pressure how quickly we got something together. It's a lot of work.
Well, a lot of meetings.
Our next piece of business is hearing from Elizabeth Goodson, our town engineer, with respect to the sewer allocation request. This is new business item number 2. Good evening, Elizabeth.
Good evening. So although sewer allocation may not be an exciting topic, it's a very important topic. And so I wanted to take this chance, because we've got a couple of requests before us, to walk through a little bit of background information and status of where we are, so that you have adequate information to weigh this selection of requests. So the 3 that we have before us are Chatham Park, Section 5.1 North, 882 Thompson Street, and East Cornwallis Street, Lot 5. So 2 single-family houses and 1 subdivision. So to kind of lay out what the current status is of our available sewer capacity, I want to make sure that we know a couple of phrases and terms that we'll use and make sure we're using them consistently and that they make sense. So there's 2 different types of permitted flow. We'll reference permitted flow from a plant perspective and also from project perspective. So the plant has a permitted flow of 750,000 GPD. We also have actual flow going to the plant. That is the annual average flow. Some people might measure this with a meter. We take data and calculate it based off of, just lost the name of the report, DMR data is the report that's done and is calculated. And so that is done periodically, about once a year. It's updated. Then we have a term called tributary flows. So that is actually flow that is going to the plant. So there might be permitted flow that is not yet tributary. So something from a project has been approved and permitted through the state, but it is building out over a phased process. So a portion of the project is not yet built. So we want to make sure we are recognizing permitted flow that is not yet going to the plant, but that is already approved through the state, through the permitting process, the project's permitted process. Sometimes people will use the term paper flow. This is generally where it's used. It's sometimes used in a couple of different places, but the total flow at the plant that we want to keep up with is the combination of the actual flow that is going, that annual average flow, plus the permitted flow that's not yet tributary. So those two numbers together are what give us the 456,108 in this case. There is also something that we refer to a lot these days as an 80-90 rule. There are two thresholds that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. The state lets us submit permits for projects on our system for up to 80% under certain conditions and up to 90% on others. It's related to how far we are along with our expansion processes. So our line to Sanford is a portion of what allows us to be able to move up this process. To be able to go to the 90% rule, you need to have permits in hand, so permits for the expansion project. So we are at a point that we're kind of in between this 80 and 90%. We have plans underway, but we don't have the permits in hand just yet. We're working actively on that. So as we talk through some things, you'll kind of see where those two, kind of where we are in between those two places. So this gives us the cap of how far the state will let us allow permits to go to them for application on our system. So it's either the 80% cap would be 600,000, the 90% cap would be 675,000. And to run those numbers out, the actual remaining capacity we have under each of those is listed on the screen. So 80,000 is 180%. Rule is 143,892, and the 90% rule would be 218,892. We also go through a process here of allocating sewer. The town has committed to developers and applicants that they can have a portion of the available capacity we have. So this is an area that we have a certain amount of allocation that is still committed, but not yet gone through the process to have a sewer permit pulled. So we are capturing that in this category. To date, we have approximately 107,953 gallons per day. So this is where understanding kind of where we remain. If all of this capacity was applied at one time, the remaining capacity that we have under the 80% rule would be 35,939 gallons per day, or under the 90% rule would be 110,939. These are where we stand today. With the requests that are before you, this is when we have a decision that we need to make of, are we wanting to allocate the remainder of this flow at this time, and that this is the status of where we are. So since it is very close in the amount requested and the amount available through the calculations and on paper, we wanted to share a couple of options. You are able to grant the requests that have been presented before you. You've got the information on those in your packet. You also could consider some other options, and these were just brainstorming some ideas that might be available. They are open for discussion, if it is something we want to explore, other procedures, other processes, we definitely would need to go back and kind of work through those. There's also always an option to request or to allocate less than what has been requested. I know there has been a precedent set that occasionally that's been done. So at this point, we wanted to open it up for discussion, for questions, and let you have a chance to determine what is the best course of action for these items that are before you. So to kind of, there's the chart that kind of gives you what the three are that are requested, and I am available for questions if there are any.
Questions by the board?
I have one, I guess I may have not understood this. We are at the 90% now.
We are.
Access to the 90%.
We are able to submit permits to the state up to 80% for sure. Because we do not have permits in hand for the Stanford line, I believe that they would not allow us to submit up to the 90% rule, but I will point out, this gives a bit tricky of understanding. So the permitted flow is this one. This is what's submitted with allocation. This is the number that they're going to hold us to of not letting us go beyond submitting permits above this amount.
The 80% there.
The 80%
Okay.
here. We have made commitments of this number, 107, which means these all may or may not come online at the same time. So there's a build-out schedule and a time. We have things underway for the force main projects. We are nearing the time of getting the approval. The state is not as worried about what we do for this portion. So if we want to choose to start to work towards the 90%, that would be up to us to make that decision. That's helpful.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Yeah, that helps clarify this, because first I thought I understood that we already were at a shortfall for needing to, unable to allocate all the requests on this sheet of
We
paper.
currently have enough sewer available to honor the requests that are here, but knowing that there are other requests that are in the works and coming right behind this, we felt it was important for you to understand the full picture.
So given the capacity under the 80% rule and the committed allocation, that's how we get to 35,939.
That is correct.
Add to what is left. And we have more than that in pending requests, do we not, or do we not?
You do have more than the 35,000, but you have less than the 110,000.
And once we reach permits in hand for the Stanford Force Main, we were able to allocate an additional 110+ thousand gallons per day.
Not an additional.
We'd be able to go up to that.
An additional 75,000.
We would be able to move from this line to this line in what we have in permit.
But then after that point, we'd be under a de facto moratorium until the Stanford Force Main was built. Is that correct?
That there could be a period of time that we would need to hold on issuing sewer permits until the Stanford line is in place.
Or
If there is
your next road
That's right.
is completed.
That is correct.
So the Eubanks plant is a permitted facility. They're under construction, right?
They are permitted with zero flow at this point.
Zero flow. Okay.
That there's also a stage of them getting their permit, getting that up and going, that may allow a little bit more cushion on this with that process. So that may be a shorter term window that gives us a little bit further to go until the force main is constructed and complete.
What is the timeline on the reclamation plan? I mean, what are we looking like?
The plant, do you have the summer of next year?
Are we ready to come online?
It's anticipated
1, 2, 4, 9, 9.
There's a little bit more than what we have today, so it would let you go a little further with what we can discharge. Our plant cannot discharge more, so it will take the other plant in order to make that combination work. So I think you've got a couple of stages of incremental adjustment that will continue to add available sewer capacity. The other thing to keep in mind is when projects become permitted, then it's a part of the actual flow, and those things are recorded more with what's actually at the plant rather than an assumed number on a document in design stage. And so those things sometimes allow more or less to be going to the plant. So there's some adjustments that happen there annually when we do that update of what the actual average daily flow is.
Historically, the actual flow is less than the calculated flow, which is one of the reasons that when we approve a site plan with an allocation associated with it, we make sure that it's going to be used before it comes back, because the paper flow that doesn't get used is not a healthy situation. And I know we've got a lot of that out there that, yeah. So honestly, if Powell Place, the apartments come online, it will actually be a benefit, because that flow will come off of the paper. It will be actual flow, and then the town would actually have some ability to allocate some more. So it's important that we make sure people use it or lose it.
And we do have a couple of projects that we anticipate may be plans expiring, and there may be a little bit that comes back from that. But we're continually looking at that and keeping this updated. So that this is something that will continue to evolve as we have projects come online or to determine that they're not moving forward and the plan expires.
Further questions for Elizabeth Driscoll?
Elizabeth, this is it's very informative. I think I'm starting to get my head wrapped around it. I'm very much a visual person, and I'm wondering if it might be possible to have a curve with all of your qualifications and statements of footnotes and all of that, but just to help us understand at what point trigger events change things in terms of the allocable capacity.
We can try and see if we can come up with something that will graphically show that.
One line for the 80% rule and another line for the 90% rule. Even if you have to qualify it heavily, that'd be great.
Appreciate that lesson about how this works.
It is a tricky one to understand, and it's something that easily the terms get interchanged and can get off track.
Is it possible to, the memorandum talks about available capacity of 110,000. That would exceed the 80%.
It would exceed the 80% in allocated and committed request.
And we could do that, but we would not be allowed to let the flow exceed the 80%. Is that correct?
The permits that come in. So with a project, so they're normally, when they're requesting sewer allocation from you, they're at a very early stage in the plan review process. There is also a sewer permit that's submitted towards the end of that process. That permit is what's sent to the state, and that is the time that we can't go over, is that permit going to the state. Then ultimately, what's actually discharged into the system is not that exceeding that, but they're trying to protect us from exceeding our capacity in the plant. So it is the permit going to the state. We would not be able to send those applications forward, or if we did, they probably would reject them at that point. So there is, go back to, there's, even if all of this came at one time, a portion of what we know now, or a portion, this will build out over time. because it may be a couple of years before all of that comes online because it's the phased approach. But we would not be able to exceed this number today if this number, once the Stanford line is approved and under construction.
So it would be possible to allocate today, for instance,
Yes.
and the permits would be, the governor would keep it from exceeding 80%. And assuming that we were to get permits for Sanford plant and or the other plant, that would free it up to the 90%.
That's correct. And if we're operating in that window that we have allocated all of what we have available, we would reach out and make sure we understand what the build-out schedules are, probably for all of the requests that we have in right now, to understand what's the anticipated time frame of when they would need sewer permits. And we'll probably be doing that regardless of the decision tonight, so that we understand what the game plan is.
Elizabeth, do you have any instincts on the next largest slug that you might anticipate?
A request for,
Additional request.
John, if I can help me a little bit.
We frequently in the last month or two been meeting with lots of developers who want to do business in Pittsburgh, and some of their requests could be hundreds of thousands of gallons. So there are big users that are participating. Some that are even drawing up plans for those folks next week.
All residential?
No, mixed.
There were a few that were on in your agenda packet that were projects that are approved but not yet submitted a sewer allocation request. That they're not on the list, but there were a few, and we thought it was worth pointing those out, that those projects have gotten through the approval process and would likely be coming as soon as they're ready to start construction.
Possibly in Cornwall, Eastburn.
Make sure I call out the right ones. No, those two are ready to go. It's the ones on the back. Cedar, Mosaic has not received, not submitted a request. The water reclamation facility is really kind of they've not submitted one, but I'm not sure that it's quite the same category. And then Lot 9, US 64 East, that one, we need to make sure we get called back up. And then there's a couple that are under review projects. There may be actually a couple others that are starting to get in the process.
I guess the elephant in the room then would be the 97,800 acre, GPD from Chad's Park. Is there a schedule filled out that we could take advantage that we could learn from?
I was going to say, since they're here and available, I'm going to let them share the answer to that question.
Good evening, Robbie Odom, Withers Revenue, on behalf of Chad Park Investors. As far as the build out, let me back up a little bit, point out a couple of things. The request we have before you tonight, we started this request July of last year. So we anticipated, these plans, working on these plans. So the 316 lots that was approved in July, this is part of the actual sewer allocation request for that. So if you'll recall, I wish I had a map, but if you'll recall what we're calling Section 5-1, which is off of Thompson Street, we have some sewer allocation for the first 30 lots, and then the first cottages that's under construction now, as you know, if you've driven by there. But this request is what we call Subdivision North, which is off of Wendover Avenue. So what we're looking at is just to get some assurance on some. We're getting ready to start major infrastructure construction on that. Vine Parkway, I think, is 1,500, 2,000 feet. Same thing with Wendover Avenue. Both those plans have been approved. The preliminary subdivision plan has been approved. We're working on construction plans as part of what Elizabeth said. We've got to get, the sewer extension permits when we do the construction plans. So with that work, we're getting ready. We hope to start Vine Parkway, in the next month. Wendover first of the year, and then that will access the lots as part of this request. So infrastructure will be starting, I hope, as soon as the next couple of months. And I think a lot of people, they don't you don't think about the infrastructure, you think about building permits. So yeah, it's going to probably be next fall or in the next year before we're actually pulling building permits. I mean, at the earliest, just because of all the infrastructure that's got to take place. So as far as build out, we're looking at starting some of these lots probably the end of next year, and probably really 2020 is when you're seeing a lot of the building permits being pulled. But in order to proceed with construction, we had to have sewer permits in hand, which is part of, we have to have sewer allocation. And you're looking at a year and a half probably process of that. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's again, the scenario is if we don't have sewer allocation, we could invest in millions of dollars of roads to extend up to this portion and then not have lots or sewer allocation. So the timing is, and I think I put that in an email to Elizabeth and Jeff, and just talking about, because when we back off and look, it's like, man, this is, it's a ways off. It's a year and a half, which is basically infrastructure construction. So
the thinking is permits, if not construction, would be complete for the plant under construction today, and that the force main Sanford would be well underway. Well, I have been thinking about this quite a bit today. And what was concerning me was the 97,800 has a portion of the 110,939. And I have been, through my work with the Main Street program, contacted by folks who are looking to do some adaptive reuse downtown. And I wanted to take this opportunity to actually reduce the amount from 97,800 to 79,800. That would be the equivalent of reducing the 200 three-bedroom units to 150 three-bedroom units. And I would be willing to make a motion to approve that this evening. 79,800. Yeah.
You heard Michael Fiocco's motion, which is to reduce the Chatham Park Section 5.1 North allocation from 97.8 to 79.8, which is 153 bedroom units. Is there a second to Michael Fiocco's motion? I'll second that. Seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Is there further discussion, or are we ready to vote?
I have a little, is this acceptable with Chatham Park? I mean, this is good with them? Ready to vote?
Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Is this a Band-Aid?
I have just one question. I know
Oh, yeah, you reduced the one,
Just the Chatham Park, that's correct.
did,
So
you want to?
make a motion to approve Thompson Street and Cornwall Street building permits.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Beth Wilson Foley, to approve the 882 Thompson Street and the Lot 5 East Cornwallis. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Thank you, Jeff.
Motion carries.
Just one question. The sewer allocation that we have for some developments that have not come or don't have any plans or anything, does it amount to any large amount? The amount that?
I mean, there's a token amount that I.
Not a whole lot, not a large.
Okay. Nothing that would make this.
We can cover it.
Hundreds, not thousands.
Maybe under.
Maybe hundreds of thousands.
Could that be on that curve? What amount is to update?
Yeah. What's in review and what we just know of that could be coming your way in the next 2 or 3 months. We'll let you know.
Is that the question, is things that have not come before you that are
No,
pending, or
in the past.
that previous permitted items? We can.
But a lot of that is already accounted for in the flow. It's already clean.
Because it's already permitted.
So if it's permitted, it would be something that until the state, a modification to a permit was done, it would still be committed.
Don't we have like a 1 year?
I don't have a total.
For our allocations, we do.
Right.
And that's what we've been doing because we have such a limited supply that we need to know somebody's going to use it. Because yeah, the paper value was higher than the actual value typically.
With the exception of the Powell Place, which is valid by agreement.
And I will say the Powell Place is probably coming close to what their commitment was with the apartments, and then realizing all those maybe have been previously deducted from that total. So those are two that I think is probably comes in pretty close.
So if they build the hotel in the coming year, does that also fit in there, or is that correct?
I believe they'll have to request a new application.
Just because, and I have one question off that, where you indicated the options to consider, the change in time procedure to act on sewer allocation requests at a different time. What would be the effect on that if we decided?
It's when we were tossing around ideas on staff, and that came up. Delaying to plat, which was what we originally had thought about, may be too late because they need to have it in place for their sewer permit request. But it's one that delaying it, we've got some projects that are coming in for a preliminary kind of stage, and then a construction drawing comes later. It may be doing it closer to the construction drawing stage of the project rather than the board approval of that for separate child part. We have two steps in that process. That might allow for it to be a little bit later in the process. It's something that would just put it closer to when they actually are going to need to permit it.
With that, presenting?
I think it may give some folks some uncertainty of submitting projects without knowing that there is potential for them to have adequate capacity when they get to the stage that they're ready to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is the first item under old business, which is the rezoning request for 893 East Street, and Victoria Babel will meet us in that.
Thank you, Mayor. This is rezoning 2018-02. K Diamond USA LLC is proposing to rezone approximately 0.172 acres, the northern portion of parcel 91278, located at 893 East Street, from R10 high density residential to C2 highway commercial. The southern portion of the property is already zoned C2, and the applicant wishes to amend the zoning map so that the entire parcel would be zoned C2. This northern portion of the parcel has been zoned R10 since the late 1980s, and the lot lines have shifted over the years, but the zoning map was never changed to match. The future land use plan has this portion designated for traditional neighborhood and the southern portion designated for commercial. The properties to the east are zoned R10 and C2. The properties to the south and west are zoned C2, while the parcels on the northern side are zoned R10. A public hearing was held on September 24th. No citizens chose to speak. The Planning Board considered this rezoning at their meeting on October 1st, 2018. And in a vote of 5-0, the Board found that the request was consistent with the future land use plan, and subsequently recommended approval of the rezoning request in a vote of 5-0 as well. Staff finds that this rezoning request is consistent with the future land use plan because while the property lines have changed, the general intent is that the property fronting East Street is commercial and the property fronting Thompson Street is traditional neighborhood. Staff finds that this portion of East Street is suitable for highway commercial, and coordinating the zoning district lines with the current property lines will simplify future development of this property. So staff is recommending approval of the rezoning request.
Questions for Victoria Bailey? You know, we've had a lot of discussion about what C2 zoning is or is not, and we're thinking that we had come to the conclusion, and I guess this is in the UDO, that this shouldn't any longer be highway commercial. Is that part of what, I mean...
That this portion of East Street shouldn't be, or we shouldn't have C2 zoning period?
Fit the definition anymore, highway commercial. Highway commercial seems to be out of the bypass now, and the streets of Pittsburgh seem to be more neighborhood commercial kinds of things rather than highway commercial.
This portion of East Street is further down. It's going to have a little bit, it's not as close to town center as, you know, the old Ford, the Eagles lot was. So it's going to have higher speeds, and a significant portion of it is already zoned commercial, and the land use plan has it commercial. It doesn't really fit the nature of C1, which is neighborhood commercial. I think this is a good zoning district for this area.
So I had similar thoughts, Mayor. I appreciate you bringing it up. And my recollection was that staff would not have had the benefit of this further articulation of the idea, because when we previously discussed it, it was explicit to the Main Street district and the lines, the boundaries that we were talking about in the downtown area at that time. But I have put a check mark in my mind on the to-do list for future, and I've heard Mr. Jones say this numerous times, that we really need to get back to a land use plan revision. And that I would like to very much take that up then, because I think we could have a vision of a downtown area that extends farther than the Main Street boundaries. We could have a vision of a mixed commercial residential type neighborhood even in this area, but we don't have that now. What we do have is a land use plan that guides this use or this designation. You know, it just still just doesn't make sense that it's not highway. But it doesn't feel highway. I mean,
we don't want downtown to become this bubble that's just business. We want to have residential as part of the downtown. So I think we need to look at this again.
I agree. I personally can't allow those concerns to influence my vote on this particular proposal. And the way that I've come to terms with it is that I think the main impact is that it's a wider, because the right-of-way involved with highway commercial, we have a wider frontage all along the street there. Which really isn't such a bad thing, because on the plot right next door, when I asked the property owner if they would be willing to extend the sidewalk over to it, I recognize it's actually, there's some very interesting terrain changes there, and there's a big old ditch with riprap in it. But looking up the street and down the street, all the way out to the intersection of Thompson and East Street, I think what we've got is potentially the opportunity of a nice roadside linear park, potentially, with very nice, perhaps a wider sidewalk, or in the future, more features like more benches on this north side of the street, potentially even more nicer plantings, all just fantasy and vision, but I do think that we need to be thinking in that direction, thinking about whether or not we, as a board, in the future really do want this to be zoned highway commercial in the future. And I agree.
I'd rather see it more mixed use.
Yes.
Use town centers.
Yes.
Whereas how have we translated that zoning district in the UDO document? I know there were several different commercial.
There's neighborhood mixed use center, there's commercial mixed use center, and there's commercial, which was the designation that you wanted to see in the second draft of the UDO. But there wasn't a straight commercial district, it was moving to a mixed use center. We haven't done the analysis of what each individual current day zoning commercial property C1, what that might would translate to. I think the idea is to translate to commercial mixed use. And C1 is going to be neighborhood mixed use center. Or it could just be commercial as well.
Yeah, I think the designation of highway commercial is common. These are not highways. Not that we don't want them to be highways. They may have been. We don't want them to be able to function that way now, especially if we have bypass east-west, we have not bypass north-south. So, yeah, no, I agree.
But we also have immediately behind this lot, nice residential. We've got townhomes back there. Across the street, back street, next, well, there's a church. I guess a beauty parlor maybe, or some kind of office, and the rest is residential. So, yeah, I was thinking about all of that. It really would be nice if we had finished our UD and could be at the point where we could have more of a mixed use.
I think really what was the overwhelming factor for staff is that 90% of the lot is already zoned commercial.
Yep.
And that this is cleanup.
Yep.
I agree with this piece, yeah.
That there's an opportunity in the future to do something different.
Yeah. I think we're reflecting forward, so.
Make a motion that consistent with the orders.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by John Bonnet, that this is consistent with the land use plan. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. And then motion to approve.
Zoning ordinance, so moved.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Beth Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. The next matter on our agenda is the Northwood High School parking lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for hanging in there with us, Victoria.
Oh, sure. The Chatham County Board of Education has submitted plans for review and recommendation. The project is located on the 94-acre parcel where Northwood High School currently sits. The proposal is to construct a new parking area that will connect to both the existing school driveway and the access road, which was approved in June 2018, which is called Phase 1. The site plan before you tonight includes Phases 2 and 3. Phase 2 will extend the Phase 1 access road to the existing asphalt parking lot. There are 386 existing parking spaces. This number will be increased in Phase 3 of the plan, and all parking areas will be paved and reconfigured. The Planning Board reviewed these plans at their meeting on October 1st, and in a vote of 5-0, recommended to approve. These plans have been reviewed in accordance with the town's applicable development ordinances by the appropriate departments, and staff is recommending approval of the request.
So how many parking spaces will there be when it's completed?
There will be 390. The plans that you have there, they have an incorrect number, but they will be changed when they're brought in for signature sets.
So the existing is 386, and it's going up to 390, so it's not really, it's only adding a few parking.
4, yeah.
But it's being
It's
paved
planned
as
out.
opposed to gravel.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions for Victoria?
Just an observation. I remember when we approved the driveway in, my concern was that it was a dead end, and that I think it showed then that it was the phase one with the roadway was going to meet up with the gravel parking lot. It may have changed the baseline on what's going on, but needless to say, I trust that if in fact this roadway is constructed and it is a dead end, that it doesn't take you anywhere, that road will be blocked off at 15501 until such time as it has a place to go.
Yes. 15. The area that connects to 15501 is supposed to be blocked off until it connects to something, and until the stoplight or at least the turn lane is in place.
Recall that phase one took you to the existing parking lot, the phase line moved, so just stating the obvious.
I had a question regarding the sewer out there. I remember that from years ago that it was the system, which is the sand filtration system, and that it was out of compliance. Has that been?
It's town sewer.
It's town sewer now?
When did you say phase 3 will be completed and the access road will be opened up as a projection?
Phase 2 will be completed, which is the portion where it's just connecting to the existing stuff. That will be completed in 2019.
Summer 2019 is projections for beginning construction.
Further questions?
So phase 3, so what's the projection when it will be completed?
They don't have a date for that yet.
Okay.
If it helps to clarify a little bit, my name is Alicia. I'll be here with Withers Ravenel. Phase 2 that you're seeing here, phase 3 is actually on the outside of these gas lines that you're seeing. So phase 1 being the roadway here to 15501, phase 2 connecting over to the parking area. I'm not sure if we have that PDF. There you go. There's phase 2. And providing the asphalt dry for the future bus parking area. And so phase 3 will be the continuation of that road all the way to Northwood and the parking lot reconfiguration.
Very good. Thank you, Alicia.
So there's no projection about when phase 2 will be
Yes.
at the first time?
At this point in time, the school board is anticipating, or ideally they would really have it constructed at the same time that phase 2. However, it's going to be up to public funding if they have funding available at that time.
Further questions? More motion? Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Jim Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The next matter on our agenda is the Hotel Incentives Project. Ryan Brucebeck will be addressing us on this.
Thanks again, Madam Mayor. I will set it up and then invite discussion. We also have Kirk Bradley from Eco Partners here, I believe, this evening to talk more about the project and answer any questions you might have if necessary. And then we have also Melissa Berg from the Chatham EDC here tonight to talk about anything maybe from the county's perspective, if you want to put her on the spot as well. But just a little bit of background on the project, and you'll recall quite a bit of this, so I won't go into great detail, but Eco Partners in Chatham Park are working on a 44-acre development in the vicinity, the north vicinity of Chatham Park, near their current campus across from where Root Cellar is currently located. The Chatham County Board of Commissioners approved incentives for the hotel to help support the new agricultural and conference center back in November of 2016. Following that, in February of 17, ECO approached the town board, as you'll recall, and requested financial incentives. The main purpose being, among some other factors, being to attract a quality brand to the community and fill a needed gap in terms of the current lack of a brand hotel. Town board, you'll recall, heard the draft incentives and commitments from staff and from Chatham EDC on February 27th. As required, we held a public hearing on May 22nd, 2017, with additional discussion. And then following that, discussed it again on November 13 and November 27 of 2017. The information you have in your packet is reflective of those materials that were discussed, I believe, on both of those meetings. Where we're currently at, and I think we have probably some additional discussion tonight that would speak towards fine-tuning some of the commitments that we had talked about. We have that information both in this presentation and available to discuss this evening as well. But I think the action at this point has been to work with ECO to revise or fine-tune commitments. We could possibly develop new incentives that would help expand the use of the facade improvement program, possibly providing some incentives for the bed and breakfast facilities currently in town who expressed an interest in obtaining some level of incentive from the town, and then possibly approving actually a level of incentives. And I'll get to that in just a second. But the impacts, as you recall, 25 employees, annually $675,000 in annual salaries, generating in sales $3.3 million. Our estimated sales tax revenue at current rates is $3,264 in ad valorem tax revenue, and then ECO at Chatham would be investing approximately $14 million in construction of the facility. You have the commitments that we looked at back in November of 17 in terms of where we were at the time in the left-hand column, and then what ECO had proposed at the time. I won't go over that word for word at the moment, and I don't know why those tables are showing up as they are. I believe in your handouts. They should be in pretty good shape. You'll recall that the last incentive package that we discussed was back in November of 13, and I think Commissioner Fiocco had forwarded it in terms of the options or the actual table. Here you can see that in year one we would start at 40% and then gradually work our way up. We had different incentive levels that we had discussed that did different things in terms of either awarding a rather aggressive incentive package, I think in the earlier examples, to flattening it out, or possibly reserving more tax revenue for the town, however you wanted to approach it. And I think the last option 4 that was discussed presented if I remember right, Commissioner Fiocco, was to actually retain more of the initial year property tax revenue at an earlier stage of the development process. So that's more or less where we had ended up after the November discussions. The earlier discussions, we talked about example 2, as I mentioned, and then example 4 was suggested during later meetings. If it is appropriate and after discussion and other commitment tweaking that you might do this evening, if appropriate, what we would recommend is to develop a resolution that outlines the incentive package and the final commitment package language. And then you would also be asked to direct the town manager and attorney to develop an agreement which formalizes the package between the town and the developer. And then, if necessary or if preferred, if we wanted to look at some bed and breakfast incentive packages, we could also consider that as well. Again, we have Mr. Badley here in the audience tonight to answer any questions you have, or if there's anything that maybe you would like to see in terms of additional commitments made above what we've talked about this evening, that we certainly tackle that as well. So with that, I would open it up and stop talking and see if you have any thoughts on the matter moving forward. Thank you.
Discussion or questions?
I have one. Mr. Grisbeck, at the incentives, what time would these incentives start? At the time they get a CO?
At the time that they would, essentially, at the time that they would actually be required to pay an ad valorem property tax. So 1 year after.
1 year after full construction?
Right.
Okay. And the other one was on the amendment to the town facade. I guess my memory is not back to when we went over this, but why do we have this facade improvement program in this incentives for the hotel?
Yeah, we don't really have anything with regards to the bed and breakfast baked into anything that we've talked about quite yet. That was just something that, based on the input that we received from the public hearing from the bed and breakfast owners at the time, the 3 bed and breakfast owners in town at the time. That was an idea that I had. You guys didn't throw me out of the room for, in terms of being able to offer something to the bed and breakfast in terms of giving them some encouragement, given the fact that they have some older buildings and older facilities. I think you yourself had at that time expressed maybe concern that we weren't able to offer incentives to other folks. And so I just kind of threw that out there as a concept.
Okay.
So it's nothing that we have, that has to be developed a little bit more, and I don't know that we would want to make it an embedded part of the action you may or may not take. Is that?
Yeah.
I get there.
And Lasseter, may I ask you if what the county ended up with as far as an incentive?
Is there Wi-Fi I can get on? I was trying to pull up.
There's either Chatham Wireless, otherwise I'd have to offer you a code.
Okay.
Might not be very good in either case right at the moment.
Kurt, do you remember the incentive level?
There were some qualitative stipulations which we had, and I'm sorry I can't find those. I was looking for them, but the incentive that the county offered was 90%, 80%, 75, 75, and 60 of the potential ad valorem revenues were given back once they were paid. I can't think of the technical word you have to say, but it's a grant.
Yes, you have to pay the full amount, and
then you get a grant back.
And it's performance based.
So you don't. They have to pay 100%, and then there's a grant that's issued. But theirs are 90, 80, 75, 75, and 60, and previous discussions, y'all were looking at something different or less than that, which I think Brian kind of outlined. And again, I don't have the qualitative, but some of it had to do with employees, trying to get them in the county and those types of things, which there's a list of those that we kind of went back and forth, and y'all were going to finalize sort of what you wanted to do in that list, some of which had to do with building to LEED standards, not necessarily LEED certified and things of that nature. So we had proposed a list, and there were some that I think either Commissioner Fields or Commissioner Bonnets perhaps wanted to add to that. But so there's sort of the grant percentage issue, and then the qualitative elements relative to that would have to be met, which would be part of the contract Mr. Grubeck was referring to.
Thank you, Reverend.
I did find an email that I sent out December 5th, so not long after our meeting, with my thoughts on it, and I resent that to everybody. So I don't recall if I ever sent it to you. Okay. There was agreement on numerous of the conditions then. One of the key features I had was that I think the employment level was at a salary of $27,000, and I was hoping to get it up to $31,000 in order to get the incentive. And I'm looking at my notes now, and my justification for the incentive was actually paying one employee's salary for 5 years as the method of calculating how much the incentive was. And if in fact we got it to $31,200 for the employees, that I would be willing to increase the incentive over that 5 years to cover that one employee. So the town has an incentive for 5 years. We give a tax rebate or a grant to the hotel that would equal one employee's salary. That was my method of thinking about it. And I think, John, at the time you weren't necessarily saying it needed to be some program, and we were trying to quantify what the heck that meant.
Was this in November when you shared these thoughts?
December the 5th.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was November 20th something. That's my recollection. I believe that we had Ryan Miller speak that evening from the North Carolina Building Performance Institute. And that was a bit of a revelation learning process at that time, that LEED is not the end-all be-all, and there's other options out there. And I would very much like to present an incentive that has more flexibility, but more to the end goal objective, which is environmental performance, energy and environmental performance. And so, I thought that at one point I had worked up some language. I apologize, I'm not able to lay hands on that. But I would very much prefer that we move forward with something that does not stipulate LEED, but instead asks for achievement of a performance metric of their choice, of the developer's choice, of the landowner's choice. I think this goes to the philosophy that if this community is going to support a new hotel with an unusual incentive, as modest as it may be, that we would like this to manifest the values of this community. We've done that with arts, with labor concerns, and in regard to environment and energy. LEED is not the only way to demonstrate leadership in that. But I do think that this is the community values, and I do think that there's some performance standards out there that may require some investment in that third-party certification. but that will enable us to have confidence that the building will perform the way that it was designed. And, it's kind of like the Essequan Beard area, to be rather than to seem. And I am eager for this hotel to be built. I am supportive of that incentive. And I'm also eager for us to kind of wave a flag out there for the community that this welcoming gateway to our community, this nice hotel, represents efficiency and environmental thought considerations.
One thing I would say is that the building code has incorporated a lot of stuff. You know that, Michael. I mean, it's a much more efficient code than it used to be, which is one of the reasons why you're not seeing as much LEED certification, and there's other standards and everything. I see in this language that there's 10% was maybe what you were suggesting, and getting a third party to do that. That would be a fairly easy way to do. Most of that's going to come in your glazing and your HVAC, HVAC, and so I think if there's this is okay if y'all want to present this, and then whatever percentages you decide that in terms of the qualifications, we're happy. I mean, I think that was what happened. We kind of got into the holiday period, and then it there were other bigger picture issues that needed to be dealt with, and the mayor brought it up when we came through. Yeah, that's right. So
I'll be happy to give this to Alice and make a copy.
That's. So then y'all can draft it.
We can give these, I don't know if the board
I'm in
wants.
agreement. This actually captured my feelings. I wanted something with more teeth than what the reply was from Eco. I wanted something a little stronger. I mean, like.
Is this something you would like to present to them
Yes.
as our thoughts?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I like what you said about art and lobby and staff. I mean, I think it to me that it makes a good effort.
Okay.
I mentioned that I spoke with Edward Holmes today because he has plans to build a hotel power place, and I was interested to know what their time frame was. And they seemed to feel they were happy that they were applying for this. He didn't feel that this was something he would need because he thought this would be a very good thing for Pittsburgh hotel, and he was very supportive of this. And so there's no, I wasn't sure if there'd be hard feelings if we weren't involved in the same thing. He feels like it's a good project. That they're going to have to do the problems different times. He's looking at maybe next year.
So are we looking to anticipate, to incorporate Michael Fairborough's suggestion into this project so that, or do we want to approve incentive now with provided that those other things come online? How does the board wish?
Well, I would allow them the opportunity to digest those recommendations and then come back with can do, cannot do, modify this, modify that. So I wouldn't necessarily force it at this moment. I mean, I agree that I'm in support of coming up with an incentive package and see if we can get to a win-win incentive.
It might be helpful to have the percentages on the table too.
My thoughts were, I mean, we could adjust those percentages. I think table 4, which was representing a salary of 27, and increase it to 31.
Example 4.
And it went 40, 40, 45, 45, 53, 53 being an odd number. We were playing catch up on the last year.
So you're talking about a flat fee rather than a percentage tax revenue. You're talking about a flat fee instead of a percentage of tax revenue.
Well, both.
because the percentage of tax revenue doesn't create a flat fee.
No, of course not.
I just want to be clear that, too, that, and I just received this email today, that these conditions up here from Commissioner Fiocco, the commitments from Commissioner Fiocco are the ones that we're copying. This looks correct to you?
I think so. That looks correct. Yep. Is that the email?
Yeah.
From me? Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. That's the piece of paper that we just
Okay.
made a copy of. So these were my thoughts in December last year.
Right.
One question I had about this is including an actual salary amount, because the numbers may change. The next, of course, we're looking at the next few years.
Right. Yeah.
But I do like this guideline that it ties to something specific and unique.
Yeah. I mean, we're just looking at the next few years, so
Yeah.
like 5 years.
Right. Yeah, in 5 years. Yeah. Well, would your idea, Michael Fiocco, be that you would keep the 40, 40, 45, 45, and then in the 5th year, they catch up to the 31, to the salary?
That's a possibility.
Of the 31?
I would.
Because you wanted to sort of ease in and not front load.
Right. Right.
As I recall. For the board to be that kind of formula.
And
Where's the 31,000 coming in here on this right here?
it's not in there. That
Oh,
was
okay.
my suggested salary.
But that doesn't have anything with this incentive and the rest.
That's
Yeah.
how person is.
Right, I got that. Yeah, but Brian was discussing the 53% here.
I think what Mr. Fiocco is saying, if they can demonstrate that they've hired somebody that makes $31,200, the town will turn around and give them $31,200 from the tax revenues that you collect. Is that right?
That's basically right, but that would be over a 5-year period, so year 1 would be less than 32.
How much less?
You have to do the math with 40% of the tax revenue.
40%, but not to exceed.
Let me, I can show you.
40%, but not to exceed 31,000.
It was based on a ad valorem tax value of 14 million with our current tax rate.
Okay, I think we're going to need some help here because your tax rate's not likely to stay the same over that period of time.
Right.
Okay. Percentages are easier than anything else.
Right, and that's why we're using percentage.
Okay.
And I set those percentages extrapolating the payment of one employee's salary with 14 million at the current tax rate. When those things change, the formula will be different.
Michael, would you be willing to work a quick spreadsheet to share with Mr. Messick, expressing your desire? I think it's not too far off from example 4 that most of us are going to support that.
I don't think it is that far off. In fact, they may want to suggest that it's a little bit more heavily front-loaded. In fact, it's 31,000. So, as opposed to saving it all in year 5 to do catch-up.
Do I recall that this building is approximately 40,000 square feet? I don't know why I have that number in my head.
68,000 square
Oh,
feet.
68,000. Thank you.
5 stories?
Yes.
So do we want to add this to next month's agenda, or do,
Please.
You want to get it done?
Yes.
Tonight?
Oh, no.
That's fine.
All right, so we'll carry that forward and then communicate with you, Clerk Bradley, if there are additional details that you might want to work together on.
Yeah, so we're pretty much looking on example 4, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, give it to you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Our next item then is there's been a request for a break. Is there a motion for the board to take a break?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Jay Farrell, seconded by John Bonnet for a approximately 10-minute break.
Have a look at Bird. I'm good. How are you?
Moved by Mike Fiocco, seconded by John Bonnet, to come back into session. And our final item under old business is Chatham Park's master plan text amendment for the stormwater additional element. Wonderful. Elizabeth Goodson will guide us through this. So I will introduce it, and then we will have a chance for Hunter Freeman to share a little bit of a presentation of some of the changes that have happened. And then Becky Smith and myself are both here and available for any questions. So we will jump right in if Hunter's ready to jump.
Ready. Done. Good evening, Hunter Freeman, Withers Ravenel, on behalf of Chatham Park. And just wanted to very quickly, I know there's been a lot of discussion probably over the past 8 months or so, but just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the major changes that have happened to the element and the design manual and other progress we've made, so I will keep this brief. But there have been a numerous amount of just small wording changes for policies and whatnot. As far as the stormwater standards go, those have remained the same. We have tried to clarify a couple areas of those. The peak flow is where the most changes have occurred. The standard is the same as we're committing to the peak attenuation for 1, 2, 5, and 10-year storms. There were 2 major comments. The first from Commissioner Fiocco, I believe, is where it started, with protecting properties downstream of development projects, existing properties with potential for structural or property damage there, and being sure that development projects within Chatham Park, but between, I guess, for property between the development and analysis point, that they were adequately managed. So we've added a provision that if the peak flow from any site for any one of those 4 storms increases by more than 10% and still is on Chatham Park property, that the town engineer, if it's deemed that there's property that may be damaged, that the town engineer can ask for additional flood studies, and we may take additional measures and put additional measures on site to mitigate any potential impacts from that increased flow. The same, as the second comment came from the town engineer, addressing flows that were leaving Chatham Park's boundary in non-buffer channels, so where there's not a formal analysis point, but where water may be leaving the Chatham Park boundary and going off-site, that we put that same provision in there. So we've committed to the 1, 2, 5, and 10-year storm for peak attenuation, really anywhere that water is leaving our boundary or even at sites within the boundary. So that's been strengthened, I think, for good reason. We're certainly not trying to impact any property adversely there. So that covers the peak flow section. In the scoring system, we've moved the methodology for how to compute the target score for any sub-watershed into the element. It was previously in the design manual, but we felt it was stronger in the element so that it could not be changed without serious discussion from both parties. So just the method by which we determine what that target score or minimum required score shall be is now in the element. We've also added, at the request of the town engineer and through our discussions, we've added the ability to add internal analysis points within the Chatham Park PDD zoning boundary. So previously, analysis points where we would show compliance with the exceptional design scoring system were only where buffered channels left Chatham Park's boundary. That was the downstream point, and we determined a watershed from there. In doing that, just for the north section of Chatham Park, where we've delineated what those watersheds would be, there were at least two that were over 300 acres in size. And the concern was, how are we managing development there? Is that too large of an area? In other words, is that just too cumbersome to look at? And so we did put a provision in this current element to allow, with discussion, additional analysis points to be put on perennial streams within Chatham Park. So we may have some watersheds where this is analyzed that are entirely within Chatham Park, and water is just hitting another perennial stream. And that was done to manage the size and scope of any sub-watershed so that it's a little bit more manageable, and that we have a more comprehensive plan so that those large watersheds aren't given some extra flexibility that wasn't intended. There we go. So moving to the design manual, which has sort of a lot of the complicated engineering side of things of how we're actually operating this whole system. Through the comments from the town engineer as well as from hydrostructures, there are a number of minor changes to make the design manual consistent with other state or town policies. So those have been made and updated. We've added a lot more detail about the forms that Chatham Park will be submitting to the town engineer and that applicants will be submitting to Chatham Park for the DRC reviews. I'll talk about that in a second on the next slide. The Watershed Map, which is this one map of Chatham Park that originally was just showing analysis points. Through discussion, we've added a number of different items that will be shown on that watershed map and updated annually. That includes topography and aerial photos, and where those water supply watershed classifications lie and where development is occurring. So all of that will be added to that map, which we've also added language that may be a series of maps for clarity purposes. And then we've also added reference documents, including some memos that I've shared with the town engineer of how we'll be doing some calculations and how coming up with some of these numbers so that that's codified and anyone coming in can replicate that, as well as some consistency memorandums that we've gotten or that DENR has previously published for issues like diffuse flow and buffer compliance, just to put those in there so that they're available for all applicants and that everyone's on the same playing field there. So those have been added to the appendices. As far as the forms and data tracking, just how this system will work, we know that there's a wealth of data. There's a lot that's in the stormwater rule as well as in the master plan that are committed elements, and we need to show at all times that the Chatham Park is maintaining their compliance with those items. So just from a operational framework, how this will happen is there will be a form that the applicant fills out. So the project applicant for any project will fill out a data form, submit that to me and the Chatham Park Design Development Review Committee. I've got a second layer of forms where I take that data, input it, and it translates a site-level set of calculations into a sub-watershed or analysis point set of calculations. And both of those forms will be sent to the town at the appropriate stage during design review. So depending on what information is being requested, we will submit that to the town engineer and give Elizabeth all the information she needs to check that Chatham Park is maintaining its compliance with all of the standards in both the stormwater element and the exceptional design scoring, as well as the additional commitments in other elements and other pieces of the master plan. So that's just a general framework there, and was one of the comments. There are many comments from hydrostructures relating to this, so we understood the importance of adding that into this final document. So lastly, just a little bit about the progress that we've made, not just since the last meeting or in the last month, but probably since February when Fred Royal departed. The amount of communication, the amount of meetings and productive meetings with the town engineer and hydrostructures has been exceptional in my mind. It's just a lot of conversation there, a lot of good conversation, productive conversation. But just outside of that, certainly the project of this size garners some attention, and it's been a popular topic for me to speak about at conferences, as well as groups coming to Chatham Park to learn about what we're doing and see what we've already done at MOBs 1 and 2 and along Freedom Parkway and Russet Run and the innovative stormwater we're doing. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from that, and really as a peer review, generally the engineering world and the stormwater world is very impressed with what we've been able to do at this point. So just wanted to note that. And at this point, I'll either pass it back to Elizabeth or just, I think at this point we're just opening up for questions for either of us, and I believe Becky Smith is here as well. So, thank you.
Questions for staff and experts?
I had one comment. Apparently it was shared with Becky. You and I had the same comment. It's on page 6, third paragraph. States that when a subdivision plan or site plan is submitted to the town for approval, at the request of the town's stormwater administrator, the stormwater program manager will provide nitrogen and phosphorus loading rate calculations. And I'm suggesting that we don't require the stormwater administrator make a request for that information, that information just be part of the application.
Yep. And we are agreeable to that. We've drafted language of such. I think we're ready to submit that immediately after this. I know what the traffic policy is.
Any other questions?
I'm curious to hear, it's a big document. I've not been able to get through the October 2nd draft. But I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind helping me understand what specific measures we're looking at for control of runoff, siltation, or slowing velocity and energy during construction phase.
Right. So the construction phase, the erosion sediment control plan governs that, and for the minimum criteria, it is meeting the town of Pittsboro and Chatham County. It's to the town of Pittsboro sediment erosion control plan, which is enforced and looked at by Chatham County. So those are the minimum requirements during construction. In what's generally happening with site plans is we are looking at the final stormwater control plan, which generally uses fire retention or wet ponds or larger devices. Oftentimes those will be used as the temporary device where feasible. So oftentimes we'll be exceeding the minimum required volume because of the looking at the long-term picture.
So your expectation is that because you will be using SCMs or BMPs for final build-out condition during construction, there's less runoff typically.
Yes, the minimum standard is the same. I don't want to.
But these fixtures, these tools will capture more.
In reality, I think, Robbie, it's safe to say that most of the time they do overlap with the final stormwater plan. Because we try to base them on natural drainage patterns wherever feasible. There are in the exceptional design scoring evaluation optional measures to gain additional points under that incentivize either exceeding the volume or putting in higher performance erosion control standards as well. So there are incentives for doing so with no strict requirement.
Okay. And I think that Mayor Perry, I think that you shared with me that you've had some conversations about additional measures like tire wash stations or other treatment of surfaces during construction phase, applying hydro mulch sooner than later, things like that. And I've noticed the wash station on the Thompson Street project. I haven't noticed it being used, but I was impressed to see it. And so, can you elaborate on that?
All right, so most of those, again, the above and beyond measures are captured through the Acceptance Design Evaluation Scoring Program. At this point, the truck wash station has been discussed with Chatham County and their erosion control group. That discussion has not made it into the scoring system as of yet, partly because of some staff turnover at Chatham County that shifted priorities, and also because of my effort to probably address the hydrostructures comments, which were more foundational in the whole program and very important to have in place. But the exceptional design evaluation lives within the design manual. It is intended that we will look at that, look at the performance of that, and it will change over time. And so truck wash stations are certainly an aspect that's been brought up multiple times, and we will look to incorporate those as a way to gain additional points there. Hydromulch would certainly today fall in the category of stabilizing areas within 7 days of disturbance, which again is a point category where points can be gained. So it is not it's not a new technique that we would have to add from scratch. We may incentivize it further because it is a good practice, but that's where that stands at the moment. I will also note that the design manual is separate from the element because it is intended to be dynamic and be able to shift mainly with policies and rule changes more quickly than the element can, but also because of technological advances. So that's where this comes in. And the last part on that is that any changes to the point system are required to come before the board for approval. And so the more ideas we get, the more we will bring back to you. It is not a system that will just change on a whim without your approval to do so.
So Hunter, I like the fact that you moved the point system into the elements.
How to set the minimum points required for a watershed.
I like that because it's a higher bar to change. Whereas now, the worksheets and everything in the design manual are there to support that requirement.
Yeah.
So making changes as you go, they have the requirement of meeting that standard. So I think it's a good change.
As far as those performance standards that John talked about, my understanding was that all three of those were the truck washing, the hydromulch, and the greater strengthened silt fencing were all ideas that came from Rachel Thorne in our Soil and Erosion Control County Office. And she felt very strongly about those, and from what I understood, Chatham Park was absolutely.
We are, as seen on Thompson Street, we're not afraid to implement them, even though it may not be codified in the point system yet. Now, two of the three, the enhanced silt fence as well as the hydromulch, are able to be captured in the current point system in a category that's directly related to them. I would say, if presented with that plan today, that we would consider the truck wash station as an innovation point in order to, give a push towards developers, whether it be Chatham Park or an outside developer, the ability to do that and reap a little bit of a reward for it in the point system. So the mechanisms are there to allow for that flexibility with new technologies before they get into the design system.
I guess I've got a problem in so much as in the 5 introductory section here on page 1. Excuse me. It just seems as though what is being proposed here is not exceptional. It is simply to state standards, and you indicate such by having changed the minimum of 85% of the annual removal of suspended solids, for example. You changed that because the state changed it. But my understanding was that what the aim here was exceptional and not just 160. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the 5 performance standards, and I'll sort of ignore number 5 because it's a generic statement. So really we have 4 true performance standards there. Control and treat the runoff from 1 inch of rainfall is equal to the state minimum as well as the water supply watershed minimum and the town minimum. So that is equivalent. Skipping to number 3 is also equivalent to the current state standard and the town ordinance. Speaking to number 3, there is really, the reason the state changed the nomenclature was because they did not have a scientific basis to back up the wording of 85% total suspended solids removal. It's entirely dependent on what suspended solids are in the inflow column. And if it's clays, 85% is almost an unattainable standard using today's technology for stormwater controls. If you have empty Coke cans, you can get 100% pretty easily. And so that was the reason they changed their nomenclature to primary SCM. And we reacted by adding some clarification that although the master plan said 85% TSS removal, which was the standard of the day at the master plan stage, the state has changed their nomenclature, so we just maintain consistency there. It's also just a very hard standard, again, to exceed and be better than what that state minimum is. That is a nationwide, a lofty standard for control and treatment of water. So that speaks to 1 and 3. Now, number 2, the nutrient levels, we do feel is exceptional and above and beyond. There is no current town program or state permitted program that allows for nutrient control within the Jordan Lake watershed. So we are hitting a standard that had been repealed by the state, and I realize the town did not have really a voice in that decision that the state had, but we are maintaining that standard. I did go back and look at the public comment period for when the Jordan Lake rules were adopted, and one of the 2 overwhelming stormwater comments was enact the nitrogen and phosphorus limitations as soon as you possibly can. So we feel like we are being a front runner in doing so through this element. So that is one element where we feel is above and beyond and exceptional. The 4th one of flood control, again, the town standard is the 1-year storm. The state standard is also the 1-year storm. It's in their buffer rules, but that's where the state standard falls in. So we are exceeding that by getting a more well-rounded flood control program by looking at the 2, 5, and 10-year storms as well. So that sets a higher bar there. So that is where we feel like the master plan commitments were in themselves above and beyond. And I think we strengthened that a whole lot with the exceptional design evaluation as well to give the requirement that you hit that point total. So if you only hit these 4 standards using the lowest level of compliance for each one, I don't believe you'll get 120 points if that was done throughout the watershed. Our projections say you'll be at 110 to 115. So where you find that extra 5 to 10 points and maintain that level of performance across the sub-watershed, it is flexible, but it means you must go above and beyond these minimums in some way.
But that 10 to 15, 5 to 10 would make the exceptionality.
That's where we intended. Yes, you're absolutely right, and we intended that, or we hope that we give developers and those working and operating within the watershed the flexibility to choose what makes the most sense to go above and beyond and not be prescriptive in saying everyone shall do X, Y, or Z, because that might not fit every site.
On page 3 of the red line version, the footnote was totally deleted except for a internal reference to the riparian buffers in the master plan open space.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me why that red line was eliminated?
Yes, this is a 2-part answer. Yeah, I do. There is a discrepancy between the committed buffers that are in the master plan, especially for intermittent streams, or specifically for intermittent streams, compared to the language that is in the open space element for buffers. The footnote in one form and this has gone through many red lines, not all of which have made their way to the board because they've been in between meetings. In one of those footnotes, we attempted to resolve that discrepancy. At the discussion with the town engineer, we didn't try to change the open space element through the stormwater element, and we just went back and said, look at the open space element for the buffer description. So the reason for simplifying the footnote was to remove a redundancy of references. And so if the open space element ever changes in the future, we don't have to also revise the footnote that's in the stormwater element. And so that's the reason for simplifying it. Now, it does look like much much of the text has been stricken, but much of that text was just a direct quote from the open space element. I hope that answers that question.
This past week, I received and gave to Mr. Ron Grisbeck a CD-ROM that had the new flood data. I don't know how often that changes, but up in the first part of page 3, where it talks about the critical environmental resources, are we tagging things to future changes in FEMA regs and floodplain regs, or are we adhering simply to what's in place now?
No, the FEMA regulations and the jurisdictional or regulatory boundary of a FEMA floodplain being the 1% annual chance or 100-year floodplain, those maps, as you know, are periodically updated by FEMA. At the time at which they make the Chatham County maps effective, there is a set of effective maps now, and I believe they were adopted in about 2006. FEMA has issued preliminary maps for those, which have not yet gone effective. But at that time, those maps supersede all of the previous information. So within the Chatham Park boundary, if FEMA were to update a flood line, we are beholden, as is everyone else in the town, to use that new flood line. Now, the town ordinance prohibits any encroachment into that flood line. And so, other than road crossings, and there are a few other allowable uses. So, we are not intending to disturb that area within the floodplain. And as it changes with FEMA guidance, we honor that line. We have to for the town's flood ordinance and flood damage protection ordinance. Now, I've referenced in this definition that we also include what FEMA calls a future 1% annual floodplain. There's a long, complicated story about why that's on the maps from FEMA and why it is the regulatory boundary in North Carolina. But when shown on the maps, the future 100% or future 1% annual chance flood line is the regulatory boundary. And so we honor that as the town does. Elizabeth uses that to determine compliance with flood regulations.
I had a question for Becky Smith, and that is, the steep flow provisions that have been added here, is that, I've heard you talk about peak flow as a tool for other jurisdictions dealing with stormwater. Was this an addition that you had suggested from hydrostructures, or was this something that was already there, or what?
That was already there. Peak flow attenuation is what Hunter has addressed, really, with this element.
But in my understanding, there are other jurisdictions that use peak flow attenuation, but they don't have the complexity of the chart and the scoring system that Hunter has inserted here, or I don't know who inserted it, but is it an easier analysis to just look at peak flow without the scoring system, or
I kind of think of the scoring system separate. The scoring system is the added piece, and the peak flow attenuation is what everybody has to meet. So they're meeting the, I think, and I did focus on, are you meeting the basic requirements? Has everybody met the town standards, the state standards for peak flow attenuation? And the answer is yes. And then in addition, I'll say like the points add to, the points can add a little bit to what he's already been asked to do. Yeah, just
it is a little bit more than the town's requirement would be.
Yeah, but because they're looking at additional storm events, so they've met the minimum. Yeah.
Okay. So there is additional. It makes it more exceptional because it looks at more than just the 1 year.
Yeah.
We're still not addressing ephemeral streams, and I just heard that so many times from so many groups here that have addressed that. How can, I'm not sure how we can address this if we haven't addressed it. So can you speak to that?
The town does not have ephemeral spring ordinance. It's not part of the current stormwater ordinance. And you guys address ephemerals only with the point system, right?
Additional points, yeah. It's an optional measure.
It's an optional. Unless they volunteer to do that, it's not part of the existing requirements.
The way to get more points.
Right.
Now, there is some, am I correct that I have to look back, that there was some addressing of ephemerals in the master plan?
I don't
think so. Yeah. I think it'd been covered in presentations that I'd seen. You know, the board had received presentations on the importance of them and what defines them and that sort of thing. But it's not in the, not in the master plan. And since it's also not in their ordinance, then requiring something of them wouldn't work.
I think the hope that I've had, or maybe the fantasy, is that we could look at certain ephemerals in a broader context, outside stormwater, but thinking of potentially ephemerals as a pathway in between ecosystems or special, what are we calling them, endangered, the unique wetlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Critical environmental.
Critical environmental areas. Granted, that's outside of what we're tasking you with, Hunter, right now. But that is something that I would continue to hope for, is that we could try to think outside of the box as regards ephemerals, so that a few more of them might be protected, and in ways that would enhance those areas that you're already planning to set aside as natural areas. Maybe there would be an overlap here with the parks facilities piece. I think that would be a real asset, because we could potentially work with many of the natural scientists in this area to demonstrate how that is excellent, how that might be excellent in some situations, cases, because one of the things that I hear often is a concern about fragmentation of ecosystems, and potentially protecting some ephemerals would allow for continuity between ecosystems.
Becky, could you speak to the correlation between the stormwater regulations and the stiffness of them with respect to how it is that our NPDES permit, which is in limbo right now, is there a correlation between how we treat stormwater and that permit being renewed?
So I think the answer is yes. That the remaining clarification, shall we say, that is needed regarding the EIS and what the state is actually wanting to require as it regards stormwater. I think we all would interpret things a little differently. We would ask that the state clarify some of that. I think that's still an issue up for discussion.
That there's a meeting coming up later this week that I think we may gain some additional clarity on.
So they had buffer requirements, they had sort of language that maybe went up and over what I would have thought of as normal. If peak attenuation was all you wanted and that was your minimum, it seemed like what they were looking for was something above that, so that you had greater nutrient reduction, maybe some more volume control, in an effort, I think, more to protect the Hall River. The nutrient loading in the Hall River and Jordan Lake is, been a topic for years, and the state has been very, I think, aggressive with what the EIS is asking. We want you to go above what is normal, because you are already adding nutrients with your increased NPDES permit. So if you've got a point source that's increasing nitrogen and phosphorus, what we want you to do, I think, is take your stormwater to a higher level, reduce more nutrients that way.
From non-point source.
From non-point source, and then we'll give you that little extra point source discharge. That is how I was taking the
But
EIS.
the specifics of how to do that is the
Right.
part that we need to talk about.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a helpful explainer.
Yeah. The specifics of how to impose that is not clear in here.
In the EIS.
In the EIS. I'm sorry. Not you.
Well, it's in that binder too. Yes, technically correct.
And how does that mesh with what many groups are telling us is that we need to adhere to the past promise of the 2,000-foot buffer along the Long River? Does that mesh together?
So they did have additional buffer requirements in the EIS. And I think that we're,
Yeah, the specifics on that, I don't remember the 2,000.
That was
I don't think it
a
was
300-foot buffer on the Hall River in the EIS.
And the stormwater element matches that piece.
I think, 200, it was 200 in certain places, 300 in some others, and we're all trying to kind of work through getting a firm, this is what we want from the state.
I think that the biggest point of clarity on that is whatever the determination is from the EIS discussion will need to be adhered to in this document, if it is not already done. So if we find out there is some piece that we did not understand clearly that needs to be adjusted, it will need to be adjusted. If it is determined that this meets the intent of that document, then we are okay. So I think that's kind of where we are, and without having the conclusions of that discussion, I really don't know that it's appropriate for us probably to get into specifics of it, because we don't know just
Well, we don't have to go into the weeds, but let's stick with the high-level policy question. Elizabeth, I really appreciate that point. So, in this meeting later this week, will that be the time when feedback is gathered from DEQ on this draft, or will this be the presentation of the draft to DEQ?
This is a discussion of our commitments through an EIS with DEQ. This is not a discussion specifically of just a review of the stormwater element. It is a broader conversation, and I don't know if the town attorney, if I've gone past what we should be talking about here, but help me clarify if we need to clarify this with what's in there.
You're correct. The stormwater element is involved, but it's not the topic.
Okay. So, I figure, I heard, Mr. Grisbeck, you explained to me that there is this statement from the EQ that there is stipulations in the EIS. They're wanting us to abide by these, but there's a very vague understanding or lack of understanding of what that means for our policies and how we set our policies here in town for enforcement of that. Is that correct?
What Becky has just said is what I think you're asking.
Okay.
So I think she answered your question before you asked.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm it again. And as I think about abiding by any strictures that's been placed on me, I think about in terms of supervisory arrangements and managerial arrangements. And when my very first job out of college, somebody told me about the rock rule of management. If your boss asks you to bring her a rock, you bring him a rock, you take him a rock, and he'll say, well, yeah, I wanted a different color rock, or I need one with a little different texture, or what have you, and you keep going back until you iteratively get it right. In cases of poor managerial instruction. And in this situation where we feel that we have lack of clarity for regulatory instruction, I think it'd be very beneficial if we could, in a very expeditious way, get this draft to them, because it seems that it will be very important to, in addition to our own town ordinances, fulfilling the stipulations in the EIS. Is that a fair statement?
Not necessarily. The essence of the element, along with all the existing town regulations, has been furnished already. We don't know what the questions are. It's hard to answer something until you know what the question is.
But have they been provided with Chatham Parks?
No, ma'am.
I think that's a good point. It's a part of it. It needs to be.
It would be more relevant if you all adopted it. Then we'd have something to show.
Well, I think we might not want to adopt it until we know it's approved by the state.
The state's not going to approve the element.
I know, not technically, but they might have feedback that would be important.
The resolution that is in your agenda package allows for that possibility.
I think it could be interesting to hear their response to some of the things in this element.
It might be.
I'm very concerned because I'm afraid that this regulatory agency might misinterpret our actions, and there's some vulnerabilities at stake, I understand.
Well, of course there are vulnerabilities.
So I would imagine that it would be better if we went to them in a draft condition, seeking their feedback and guidance and direction, rather than presume to finalize something before we've gotten that direction.
I mean, the ultimate goal is to make sure that our drinking water is clean and safe. It's not necessarily to push this through. We want to make sure that 20 years from now that the water in Jordan Lake and the Hall River are still drinkable.
As far as water supply, watershed regulations are concerned, this is not going to have any adverse impact at all upon that. This is not an issue involving water supply. The questions that have been raised are not an issue related to water supply.
I'm not talking about water supply, I'm talking about water quality.
For water supply purposes, this is not part of the discussion.
We're talking about quality rather than supply.
Quality for purposes of drinking water is not an issue.
Because you can spend more money at the drinking water plant.
No, sir. There's no part of Chatham Park that's going to impact adversely the water supply for the Jordan Lake watershed for drinking water purposes.
Stormwater control is all about it, to make sure.
No, ma'am. If there's other things, stormwater does to other things that affect the water, but not necessarily for supply of water, drinking water.
I think there might be some people who disagree with you on that. I think nitrogen from runoff impacts water quality. There's all kinds of things.
And you've heard that Chatham Park is going to meet the Jordan rules. They're not. You can't enforce them on your own. They're going to voluntarily meet those.
All we're suggesting is it might be nice to get some feedback while they're looking at the town ordinance. It might make sense for them to look at.
I don't think they're going to look at the town ordinances. We told them what the town ordinances say. We don't know what their questions are. We will find out their questions. And if you all have not adopted, we have told them that it's under consideration. And we told them in general what the stormwater element will do.
And we've worked towards the specific components of it and trying to address how this will be. But to speak to Town Attorney's point, without it adopted, we don't have the ability to enforce this. This document does not exist officially. We only have our town ordinances, and this does come closer to meeting some of the requirements that are in place because of the proximity of this land to the hall.
Well, I'm encouraged that we have Section 7, Elizabeth, that gives you and the board additional opportunity to modify and revise if needed.
I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of finalizing this and formalizing it when we haven't had that formal guidance from the state. And I think that that's putting the cart before the horse, frankly. I think that we need to, as a board, assert the need for that guidance based on our current ordinances and rock plan of management. You know, here's the rock. What needs to be changed about it? Where do we hit the mark? Where do we miss? What can we do better?
John, I kind of disagree a little bit with you there because Elizabeth is just telling us, you know, we have to adopt, or we need to adopt this element to have something to show the state that we are the direction we're in. Right now, all we have is town ordinances, correct?
Town ordinances and a draft document that we've been working on but is not enforced. In the master plan. The master plan text is adopted text. The master plan and the open space element that speak to buffers.
The master plan talks about the different storm events and
overall,
yes,
that's
the flood control in the flood control, the nitrogen, and the basic water quality, and the additional. That's correct. I mean, it's the exceptional design evaluation is not adopted. And just as a reminder, the general provisions of our elements specifically state that we must at all times comply with state rule and permits. And so at the time when the state rules on the EIS and tells us, here's what thou shalt do, and that's in the closed book, we may have to adopt, revise the element and or the design manual.
Here's my problem with that, because you're talking about that if the state standards required certain things, that you meet that. But what we're talking about is supposed to be exceptional, so what we're expecting you to do is not just stop at those state standards, you're supposed to be exceptional. So to me,
We have not. We're seeking clarity on what the EIS intended to do.
So the whole package meets the state, it meets the town's requirements, meets the state requirements, and
maybe that's a kind of a confusing point, is that the EIS is not state regulations. It was a state part of the process for getting the permit, right? And so maybe when you say that, like this, we meet state minimums, then well, yes, but that's separate from the environmental impact.
Just make sure we're talking about the same thing. I know Jay was expressing comfort that if the state has state requirements, it's going to be required to meet that level. But to me, it sounds like the Reverend Creek thing issues might be a little stricter. So it might exceed what the normal state standards are, because they were asking us to go beyond just the state basic standards. That's what my discomfort is. That you can't just say, oh, we don't have to worry about this because they're going to have to comply with state standards, because with Robertson Creek, they might ask for more than what the state standards require. That's what they've been saying.
So, just if I may, there are none of the 5 stormwater standards that we've outlined here are in the EIS as a specific standard. So none of the requirements that are posted in the EIS that are currently under discussion override or duplicate. There's nothing about the EIS that says anything about flood control or nitrogen or 85% TSS standard, any of that. There are 2 points of discrepancy. One is one of the stream buffer widths that we're seeking clarity on, and the second is the level of density that's permitted within 2 of the tracks, and the intent of what the said and how we accomplish that. So those are the 2. It does not change. It would not change any of those standards. There's nothing there to say that in the EIS that says, for instance, provide 100-year flood control. It's not an overlapping requirement compared to the 4 performance standards that we've listed. That's not to say that the final determination of the EIS and the intent that's in it might not mean that we need to change some pieces of this or add some more to this. Right now, one of the issues is in conflict with really the open space element, not the stormwater element. It's a buffer issue. that the density that you're referring to? No, the density, they're, without going into, well, I'll go into a little bit of detail, that there's one of the proposed mitigative measures in the EIS that says certain parts of Pittsboro are limited to 10% impervious cover. Puts a hard stop there. There's another section that says certain parts are limited to 6% unless they install stormwater control. That if they install stormwater control, we would absolutely comply with that piece. So it's the one that doesn't say with stormwater control. Now, the guidance document from which that standard was lifted, in our opinion, goes on to say we really mean mimic what 10% impervious would result from in a hydrologic condition, not thou shalt stay below 10%. It says the performance of the stormwater system shall mimic a watershed of a bed no more than 10% impervious. Now we would meet that standard with this. So, but that's the clarification we need from the state.
Clarification is how do they want to define that? Right.
If we get to that level of discussion with the state, there's some higher level pieces that we may never even get to that.
And they may say this is fine, but they may also say when we need
I don't want to be ambiguous over what we're talking about with the state.
Right.
So at that point, if we get to that discussion and they ask us and say, how are you meeting the intent of this density limitation through your stormwater performance, then we'll absolutely go into everything we put into this element and everything in the acceptance design system. We'll say, well, in the 10 years or so since this EIS was adopted, we feel like the technologies have allowed us to do this. That EIS was adopted before the Jordan Lake rules were in full effect. There are a lot of things that have happened since that document went through. So,
but mostly worsening water quality.
I'm saying a lot of things regulatory-wise to put additional controls on stormwater.
All right, sorry.
And without getting into the other side of that.
Okay.
But I guess my concern is that given what Elizabeth Goodson has shown us tonight with respect to where we are in our water and wastewater situation, it seems to me that paving the way to and guaranteeing the renewal of that permit and not holding up the Sanford force main is where we absolutely need to be. We can't afford, Chatham Park can't afford, none of us can afford for that permit to hang out there any longer. We need it in place and need to stay assured that what we're doing is in accordance with all the regulations, if not above all the regulations.
Well, and that this document, this element, and the design manual do meet and exceed every single state guidance that's been published and made rule to date. Now, if we go through the EIS and they come back and say the state needs more, we already have a provision there to say we will adapt these to meet that. I don't believe that there's any negative perception that comes of having this element in place and enforceable to say we took a shot, and for the next whatever time that is until the EIS is settled, that we're doing this much more than we have to. And if that bar needs to be raised further, we'll raise that bar further at that time.
You're not really looking at your document, though.
Well, again, if we get to that point of the discussion, when we're at the level of them saying, well, show us how you're meeting the intent of what we asked for originally, we will get to that discussion. And they will see it.
Why are we not already there? Mr. Master?
I don't know why why are we not already where?
For us to say, this is how we're intending to meet these stipulations.
We have told them for several months now that you all have an element for stormwater under consideration.
And the meeting was scheduled for this coming week some time ago.
We were unable to meet earlier than this coming week, this week. It's difficult to arrange that many people together.
Okay.
Now, when you said this has met or exceeds the state requirements,
Yes, ma'am.
so you all have looked at the state requirements in depth. Maybe
Yes.
Okay.
So state requirements separate from the EIS.
Separate from the EIS.
Yes,
The base
separate from the EIS.
State rules for the Piedmont of North Carolina, the water supply, watershed, and critical area rules, and the Jordan Lake rules.
There
for
are
new
so many
development.
different rules, that's why we put the matrix together, because we cover all of those.
And the town of Pittsburgh rules. And the town of Pittsburgh rules, yeah.
Yeah. Chatham counties, they're militant. They don't apply. We look at them anyway.
What'd you think of that?
They're up here,
They're a little,
we could
they
have.
have some things that are different.
Okay.
And that was another reason to compare those things. What can we learn? What do we want to change up as a town, as opposed to just a Chatham Park feature? And where are we in relation to, Chapel Hill, Chatham County, and what do we want to be coupled with there?
And at this point, you are requiring all development within Chatham Park to adhere to this document. We are, even though technically, yes. Even though technically you're just under the town's requirements. Yes, internally, with all projects, we are going through these components and checking to see how we're doing.
The formal process of that coming to us is not in place yet. So it is an internal check that they're doing. We are verifying with the town ordinance that it's correct.
If you look at the planning board meeting minutes, it's, in those meetings, often we are explaining how we are being exceptional in stormwater design in the narrative form. They've asked us to do that in the past.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking of. To clarify that, with the submittal of the element, like last Wednesday and Thursday, is look at the element again, the response comments. I have not gone through the design manual with the fine-tooth comb with the changes that have been submitted this week. That's a lot. But there's more than I have. But there are still pieces missing that will be submitted later.
Yeah.
The watershed map is
The watershed map we
coming
committed.
along, but hasn't.
Again, it's the chicken or the egg. We proposed language of what's going to be shown on the watershed map. We've made a commitment to provide it within 14 days after approval, whatever date that may be. But that's just so we don't prepare.
So there is a base map in there. The more complex one that Hunter referenced on the slide with the additional detail is what's going to come next in a little bit. And there's some of those components that we still believe are very important, and we work with Hunter very closely on getting some of that refined. Those are things that we've got to continue to work on and get into that design manual, the updated versions. But some of them we will continue to need to update as we use them. And until we start working through this workflow more actively, that's when some of that will get refined a little further.
And that's what Elizabeth and I were talking about with regards to all the forms and the tracking. It's like, okay, the forms, some new forms have just come in this
Put them
week.
in the design manual.
Yeah, but really until you etch out the process, the volume of data that needs to be handled is huge. And
But we're making every attempt to make that as simple.
right. So the forms, the process, and the tracking is
And
probably
everyone's
going to
busy
get.
to simplify that.
Well, it's probably going to take 6 months to get a few things queued up on, so that you can go, oh, okay, that's not helpful, or this isn't working over here. And then I would imagine you'll be back
We'll be
fairly
back
soon
with some modifications
to revise the
as
design
needed.
manual.
That's not to change the intent or the purpose, it's to
Right.
change, it's to make sure the operational functions are smooth as they can.
Right. This doesn't add a burden to the town. We don't want it to add any burden to them either. But this tracking impervious data on every site plan that comes in parcels, and then figuring that out and how it applies to roads, and then tracking that over the next 30 or 50 years is a task in itself, and separate even from talking about the stormwater, right? That the town part of this process is very important.
Well, it makes sense you'd want to sharpen the tool as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
The tracking mechanisms are pretty well established because there's so much electronic data that gets shared, so that any site plan, any roadway network can be transferred to the regulatory body in GIS technology that they can confirm and document and track. Because, I think it's going to be really interesting when parcels get developed and then redeveloped, because they're going to get carved up into different pieces and what
and
parcel
they
X
shift the
now-
basin, right?
Well, it could, but I think the technology is there. So it is a task. It's difficult, but it's a bunch of engineers doing it, so.
And we hydro structures wholeheartedly recommend applying the GIS system to this tracking.
Right.
I think it's going to be the savior that makes her stay. Right? It's that big.
Right, you're going to click on something and it's going to say, I am all of this.
I am all of this. Here are my construction drawings that were approved 15 years ago, and here's the stormwater management plan. Oh, because you'll have a stormwater management plan that comes in for an entire section, like 5.1. It's got 9 different SEMs in it, and 3 of them are getting approved with this set of drawings, and 2 of them are over here, and this one only applies to the road, and now she's got to find it 10 years from now.
But being able to click on a map on an online portal, just click that dot and say, here are all the
Yes,
drawings.
here it is, and also in tracking it and submitting it. If he tells her, we've got 30% built upon area, and she looks at it and goes, oh, it's 100, she can click on it, and it will tell her what it is.
So this is not unique to Chatham Park. This is
No,
really, all projects within the town need to
embrace
have the
Yeah.
same.
Every-
There's site plan commitments on every site plan.
So the town has already got that
No
with
different
sewer.
from what we're committing. Right.
So, yeah, so using it with stormwater, when you think of how many devices there are going to be, it's just going to be, it's either that or die on a flood of paper, really, right? I mean, yeah, because then it ends up with the stormwater plants coming in like little puzzle pieces. The basins get cut off because they're only directing the basin that's being done by one roadway, and then you can't see the whole basin. It comes in a different package 3 months later.
Yeah, our discussion's good.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's a lot.
They're good. They're productive
Yeah.
because it makes us think about it.
Well, and too, you
That's
guys
how
are on
we
the
ended up
developer
where we're at.
side, right, all of them, and now we're making them switch over to the municipal side, really, and say, oh, how to manage.
I need to
How
be
do
on
we
both
manage?
sides.
Yeah.
In my position.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we're still going to need to refine and work on, and we know that and recognize that we've got to
Right.
sharpen that. Are there other questions we can help and answer?
I have a question, and this is a loaded question, I suppose, and this is for you, Becky. We hired you as our consultant to represent the town's interests, and you created this 14-page document with suggestions. I personally did not have time to read this again and go back and see if these things were included. And what I'd like to hear from you is if there are significant things in here that you suggested that are not in here and that we need to still look at.
I would not say they were significant, except for the resolution for the EIS. I wanted clarification for that, and they are got that in process. There are little things that we are still working out, that as I made the comments and they responded and I responded back, we have narrowed them down to manageable.
Yeah, I would say a handful of things that we are still refining.
Really just,
and they're not
they're
not changing content or full message of this document. They're how we process the information and make sure that we track things appropriately.
So it's procedural.
Well, look, we have a question about the tree wells. We want to get that resolved and documented and figured out. So tree wells on my list of significance would be kind of down here in the EIS and making sure that we've met everything is much higher.
It sounds like we can use a little more time to have an open meeting, get some of these small things worked out and into the document before we vote on this. It seems like we're close, but we're not quite ready for that vote yet. Like maybe this gets put on for the next meeting to make sure all these things that I'm hearing people talk about get into the document, get into
The items that, in my opinion, the items that Becky's mentioning are in part procedural and in part items that are really, I don't even know if that will result in a design manual change.
Maybe they've done.
They're
But we've been trying to get
Nice.
designed.
And I don't know what that exact comment about the tree wells is.
There's 14 pages, that's a lot of suggestions.
Yes, it was a lot of suggestions, and I will tell you that Elizabeth has tracked each and every one, and she has gone back with me. This is our third official written review, and she's not lost one, right? We may not have seen the 100% match, but we resolved it so that we said, okay, this is good enough for what she needs right now.
And it was one of those that highlighted an issue, and then we worked through what was the best way to solve those issues. But I would say we are down to, I don't know that there are any remaining items for the element text. I think the
nutrient one, that was
the nutrient one that we referenced there, yes. That was the last one of the element text. And the remainder are things from the design manual. And so if you choose to adopt it, that is the document that we anticipate would need to be updated more often. If you
The design manual.
The design manual. If you choose to wait, then we will work hard to get those resolved in the meantime.
Becky, do you agree with that statement that other than that one sentence, that the element has got the high level, it addresses the issues, and that the design manual is really where the nuts and bolts happen?
Yes. We went through the element Wednesday morning, item by item by item, and then we finished up yet Thursday or Friday. And so we got to that one thing that I had sent her back about the nutrients, but she has kept track of each and every of the items. There are outstanding items. I don't want to say they're not, but
Can you feel comfortable telling us what those are, and maybe you can explain to why you wanted to?
I did not bring that list.
Okay, I have it.
Well, it's the response comment list that we've been passing. Yeah, that we
I've
just
got my current
got.
responses in here, and you're welcome to reference those.
No,
I
didn't. Yeah, that's.
You talked to the
I considered it, the exercise to put that together, I did not have time for.
Yeah.
I honestly was trying to provide it for your sake, to just see how things were resolved, because it is.
That's the piece I'm missing.
It is 30-some pages worth of document at this point that tracks all of what's gone on, but it's our notes, and so it's not necessarily helpful for resolving it to outside folks other than us.
Yeah.
It really is down to, I would say, less than 12 items, and they are related to things like the GIS tracking, the tracking, the forms, making sure that we've gotten those polished for submittal forms for applicants. I don't have the right document with me though.
But we did. And she has not lost track of one.
And so even if we move forward tonight, that list is still my list. That is the list we will continue to work towards ticking those items off. They are not done until she tells me we're good. On those, they were her comments originally to me. They're not done until we have an understanding of where the intent was.
And maybe that's part of what y'all have missed is the back and forth, right?
And again, many of these, I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but some of them are second and third level comments, where the first comment from Becky was, we need a form. And so I provided the form, and the second comment was, that form's good, but I'd like to see this, and this.
I've read.
And the third round of comments was, not insignificant to the point of change the font, but the third level comment is, well, I'd like a little bit of tweaking. So, I mean, it's not as though there's a major gap in what's in there.
There has been effort made to address all the comments, and whether or not we're resolving with you, we're still working to wrap up.
And still waiting to get the map, and those details are still coming in.
Those I think we've hammered out the details of what is on that map, and I've committed in the comment responses and with Elizabeth to provide that within a very short timeline after adoption, simply because in the last 3 days since they met on Friday, it was just not practical to have that ready tonight. But it will be put in there immediately after this.
Can I ask a question of Paul Missick? Paul, when you all talk about the idea that if additional regulations come in, is that captured by you in 3 and 4 of
Yes,
the
ma'am.
now therefore be it resolved?
Yes, ma'am.
So, but there it says the town may apply subsequently adopted ordinances and may modify the effective provisions if a federal or state law has a fundamental effect on the element. Should they be shall instead of may?
That would bind you. I was trying not to bind you, to give you the choice.
We want to be bound to abide by federal and state law. We want to bind ourselves to that.
Why would we not want to be bound by it?
You have to go look at the statute and see the grounds specified in there. This is not talking about state law in number 3. This is talking about your rules, your regulations, whether you want to make them apply or not, based upon the criteria in 168 and 385. 4 is if state law or federal law changes. Yes, you would there.
So 4 could be shall, and 3 could be may, and we would still be well protected in your mind.
No. The state law, the law has to have a fundamental effect on the element. So not all laws will necessarily have a fundamental effect. So it's up to you to determine whether it's a fundamental effect or not.
And hence the may.
Right.
Thank you. Any further questions for the triumvirate?
Well, I think I've heard that the element language with this one edit is done. It's solid. It's the design manual.
Yes.
You still are working to make sure it satisfies all 3 of you.
I'll say we will almost always be working.
Right. And so
as the middles come in, as we tweak
And
it.
we've also agreed to provide pamphlets and additional
That's right.
information to
Educational
take
information.
some of the element language, both in the open space element and this one, and make it more compact.
Just
Explain for those others. But yes, design manual items are what those items are.
and you're 3 engineers working to make sure these documents, these spreadsheets, these tools are exactly what you want them to be.
Yes.
Is there any doubt you're going to get there?
not in my mind.
From where I'm sitting, it looks like a pretty good working relationship. So,
And I think we've come a long way with the things we've gotten accomplished, and I think there's a resolution that can be met on the remaining items.
You think, Becky?
I was going to say, you've got the words in your mouth.
Yeah, she has done a very good job of keeping up with what I thought was a very difficult meshing of requirements. And it may take some time, but I think it's doable. I won't tell you that it's 100% done.
I was going to say, as our town consultant, is there anything that you can think of that we need to know about, we need to work on?
Not that we haven't already.
Besides the small things, is there anything that causes you concern?
No, not once clarification of the EIS is handled. That would be my biggest concern right now. I want them to have GIS files. I think it seems like a small thing, but in the scheme of the workload, it's a big thing.
And we're open to providing GIS files. The question that we haven't discussed is exactly what's in that GIS file. Is it just the roadway impervious? Is it, what else is in it? So
those
it's an
details
easy discussion
can
to have.
work out, right?
We worked through some other bigger ones first.
Yes.
And that
Then tracking has been kind of left to the end. Is it important? Yes. Is it manageable? I think so.
But the EIS, if we were to adopt this, EIS would inform us that we would need to change it.
That's correct.
Or not.
The result of that discussion with the state.
That's the goal.
That's how I interpret it.
So I'm hearing the language of with that one change is good for the element. The nuts and bolts still have some bells and whistles put on, I's dotted, T's crossed, all capable, you all understand that. the EIS will affect this document or it won't. Motion to approve.
Second.
Would you like to
Yeah,
incorporate this language?
read this revision into the record that you made
Yes.
in that one paragraph.
I do.
Moved by Mark Fiocco, seconded by Jane Farrell, and we're about to have the reading of the change.
It is the third paragraph on page 3 of the October 2 version, the marked up version. Page 6, sorry, third paragraph, page 6. It says, when a subdivision plan or site plan is submitted to the town for approval, at the request of the town stormwater administrator, the stormwater program manager will provide, for informational purposes only, nitrogen and phosphorus loading rate calculations for the applicable sub-watershed in which the proposed development is located. I am saying strike at the request of the town stormwater administrator, which in essence means that you will submit this document, these calculations, with every site plan and every subdivision.
Could I read how
Yes.
it's revised so that we make
Okay.
sure it reads okay?
Yep.
When a subdivision plan or site plan is submitted to the town for approval, the stormwater program manager will provide updated nitrogen and phosphorus loading rate calculations for the Chatham Park boundary and for informational purposes only for the applicable sub-watershed in which the proposed development is located.
Okay, that's better.
Yes,
That's better.
that's what we talked about this
Yeah.
morning.
And I can give this
Thank
to
you.
the town
Give
clerk.
that to
Sure.
Alice. Thank you. You've heard the motion. Is there further discussion?
Yes. So, my concern with this remains that we're in a position of vulnerability. And I don't think I've heard anybody yet say that DEQ wanted us to bring a final policy for them to respond to. We understand that we're in a situation of vulnerability where we don't know what exactly DEQ wants us to do. But as I try to think through what they would be thinking as regulators, I believe that they would want us to come with the draft, not the final policy. It seems rather arrogant of us to want to come with the final policy.
Agreed.
And I'm very, very nervous of alienating the regulatory agency that controls the renewal of our NPDES permit. And I haven't heard reassurance that we won't be doing that with this action.
I don't see the harm in waiting until after this meeting takes place. A lot of loose ends still.
Further discussion?
I also want to say I greatly admire the work that has been done, and teamwork, and really appreciate that. And I wish that I could vote for this. I can't tonight. I'll vote perhaps after this meeting, after we hear back from the state.
And that's my reservation here. I think you've got to come up with a tight, good plan, and very complicated. I think this is of all the elements, this is definitely been the one that's the most complex and also really important. And I do commend you for your work too. I think my discomfort is rushing this through before we've had this meeting next week.
Later this week.
Yeah, right, later this week.
Paul Messick, is there any need in your resolution that has been proposed here to state that we're only approving the element and that we're not approving the design manual? Is that a necessary insert? Or are we doing both of them?
Well, the resolution talks about the element that's attached to this resolution, so presumably it will be the element and not the manual.
It includes the appendices and the design manual.
The design manual is with.
Is an appendix.
Yes.
Well, if you can delete the appendix, then you could attach it to this as the motion calls for.
I guess a point of clarification for myself, are we separating the two? And if we are, what is the expectation of the design manual to come back before you for approval, to work out amongst us? I mean, I wanted to make sure we're clear on what that
My
expectation
thoughts
is.
are, I would approve the design manual, knowing that you're going to work out these details, because, Elizabeth, you need to have them worked out so you know how to use the document. So I have no doubt that you are going to deny any plan that comes in before this is done, and that you're going to use this document for the basis of approval of things. So I'm comfortable with it being approved right now, knowing that you're going to be a taskmaster and make it finished.
My question is simply to clarify.
I just want to make sure I understood it.
Okay, so you've heard the motion, which is to,
So you think everything in reference to the element is consistent with what we have seen? Yes, ma'am. The only thing you need to tweak the design manual.
The design manual and some added information that we've all agreed on.
And the outstanding question of whether or not the EIS would be interpreted by a state agency that's having any changes to this.
If they decide that, it's going to have to be revised, I would
To be
imagine.
revised.
Yes.
A map, yes.
anything further? So the stated motion before us is the approval of the resolution in our package with the modification of the language that was read by Ken Eagle that clarifies page 6, paragraph 3.
The October 2 version.
The October 2 red line version.
We do know that the marked up version to the unmarked up version, pages change, paragraphs change.
Page 6 of this copy.
It would be the second full paragraph, I believe, according to Elizabeth's copy, the way it printed out. They print out differently sometimes.
On the unmarked version.
But you read what was in the draft, and I read what the revision was, so it's the same, it's that paragraph.
It's that paragraph.
It's the last paragraph before C, peak flow attenuation. That's probably the easiest way to identify.
Those in favor of the motion as stated, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
The motion carries 3-2. Thank you all very much. Our last item on the open agenda is Commissioner's concerns. Jay Farrell?
Yeah, I just have a few little things. I think Jeff may have got a phone call from the lady on Brown Street, Chris Street, regarding the talks and all. She called me this afternoon, so I think you
I
took
wish
care
there
of
was
it.
something in our ordinances that we could do about that. I just don't see anything in our current ordinances that would.
That's what she told me. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
She did call me. Mr. Bruce, possibly I've had several residents regarding leaf pickup, if we could possibly move that up a little bit from the storm and all. And several people, I believe the leaves are falling a little sooner.
I'll see what we can do.
Okay, that's it.
Okay.
I had something, but can't think of it right now.
My concern is that Mr. Brucebeck thinks these trash containers are big.
Oh, it's just my first glance. We'll find a way.
I hope I get there and go, no, that's what I was expecting.
Something to learn.
No, I don't.
I received an inquiry from a constituent, fiscal conservative, concerned that the 2018 budget we passed is just a scanned document. It's not text readable. Is that something we can fix?
I think so.
Okay. Great. If we could do that in the future, avoid that happening, that'd be great too.
I received a concern from two constituents regarding our policy to charge $45 for late water bill paid. And I don't know if the board wants to take a look at that again, but what that does, according to this constituent, was that he felt that it was penalizing the people who were really late to pay. So if the board wants to take that up at some future time, we can direct that. Other than that, I believe we have a closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-318A3 to consult with our town attorney regarding pending litigation. Is there a motion to go into such closed session? Moved by Margaret Fields, seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously.
I screwed up. I put both on the thing I gave you.